I punch all these here. Or just this one here. All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to this joint hearing of the Veterans Affairs Committee and the Legislative Women's Caucus. We are here today to discuss the issue of military sexual trauma. According to the California Research Bureau, approximately 1 in 5 women and 1 in 100 men in the armed services report experiencing military sexual trauma to the Veterans Health Administration. However, in California, in a recent survey of California's women's veterans, requested by the California Commission on the Status of Women and the California Department of Veterans Affairs, the Research Bureau found a substantially higher percentage of women reporting military sexual harassment, 55.8%, and military sexual assault, 33.3%, indicating the problem of underreporting. Military sexual trauma clearly has a devastating impact on the lives of service members. Service members who suffer this type of trauma have higher rates of physical health problems, mental health problems, alcohol and drug abuse, and relationship difficulties. This committee recognizes that the entity with primary authority and responsibility for this problem is the United States Department of Defense. However, California has more veterans than any other state, the nation's largest National Guard, and a huge active duty and reserve military component. So we are here to learn what the California Military Department is doing to establish a military culture free of sexual assault. Many of the men and women who survive sexual assault, sexual trauma, live in our state and are part of our communities. Survivors often turn to state and local agencies and nonprofits for care and support, rather than to the military or to the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. We are here to learn how military sexual trauma is impacting California and to learn from the experience of survivors. We are here to learn about what programs work and what we can do to improve the support we provide to survivors. I'm very honored to be joined by the chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus, Assemblymember Lowenthal. Ms. Lowenthal, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to my colleague, Assemblymember Muratsuchi, and to his committee. October, as you probably know, is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, a chance for all of us to acknowledge the terrible impact that domestic violence has in our communities and resolve to stand together, hold perpetrators accountable, help survivors heal, and prevent future violence. All too often, domestic violence and sexual assaults are overlooked, ignored, or covered up. It happens in our neighborhoods, our universities, and sadly, our military. That's why we're here today. Let's start with some blunt honesty. We need to call sexual assaults what they are: rape. We're talking about rape in the military. We're asking our soldiers to defend our freedoms, and their most basic freedom is being robbed from them. Women vets, military families, and women in the military have been priorities of mine personally and during my tenure in the legislature. I sit on the advisory board of U.S. Vets, and I've personally authored legislation benefiting veterans. As chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus, we have continued making women who serve, have served, and their families a priority. Additionally, when the Commission on the Status of Women went dark 2 years ago and lost all of its funding, Speaker Perez and I worked hard to reinstate their budget and redirect their mandates. Women vets are now a mandated issue area of the refocused Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. I want you to know that even in times when you feel that no one is paying attention, we are. Again, I thank all of you for being here. I look forward to what is ahead. I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Assembly Members Atkins, Yamada, Eggman, Talamantes Eggman, Assembly Member Cheryl Brown, and Assembly Member Stephen Fox. So now let's begin with our survivors. Will Kate Weber and Victoria Sanders please come forward? Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. I'd like to start by asking Ms. Weber to begin our panel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, John Spangler. Good to see your face. My name's Kate Weber. I moved here in 1979. Illinois immigrant, and I enlisted in the Army at 17 and a half out of Novato, California in Marin County. I was going to independent studies and working a full-time job as a senior in high school, and I was doing a great job with people, and I knew that I would be a great leader, especially if I could work with other teenagers and get them to show up on time. So I felt strong enough to do some time in the military, being my grandfather served in World War II and survived Anzio, Italy, and I have an uncle who was a Vietnam surgeon and is now a PhD, works with veterans. So my appeal with the military was that, it may sound funny now, but I remember tailhook scandal and thinking that they had fixed all those problems. So I enlisted in 1993. And I will share with you that many years later, I'm 39 now, so I've been in the VA system for 20 years. Last year, as a survivor and an advocate in recovery, feeling great about my life, I went into the Veterans Service Office in my county, which is Sonoma County. And I wanted to go see what MST survivors were being given to make them feel comfortable opening up about something they were denied when they were active duty. So once they've become victims with no benefits, and sometimes their rapists retire out with full benefits, TRICARE for life, the whole nine, and the survivor gets kicked out of the military. In my case, 9 months after I was raped, I was discharged as a weight control failure. However, it was an honorable discharge. Of course it was. I was a good soldier. But my paperwork says weight control failure. And if that didn't cause problems, I was 300 pounds 3 years ago. And so what I've done is be very transparent and honest with my providers at the VA. They gave me gastric bypass surgery when I couldn't lose the weight. I have a pretty severe back injury that's, from the rape. And 3 years ago, I was addicted to pain medication, and I got clean, and I realized that I needed to see what the community was doing for other survivors. And when I went into the VSO's office, I spoke to the man in charge, and we had a nice conversation, and he had me convinced that he was hiring other females and that MST is not handled any differently than any other claims, and there was no reason to have somebody specifically trained to handle writing out the trauma. In 2003, when I did my claim, it was required for a victim to submit everything that she or he has, which meant my diary, my military discharge documents, the evidence I had that I wasn't a weight control failure, all those things. I could not get the Army Discharge Review Board to change my discharge, so it still says weight control failure, so that's embarrassing. And I went into the Veterans Service Office to see if things had changed in 10 years, and he kind of sold me, and I thought that they did. And then he left me in the office for a minute, and I stood up and I looked around the office, and I found a patch on his wall. And I will share it with you all. And it was a patch that said tail hook. I wasn't there. I didn't see a thing. And it's a picture of Bart Simpson grabbing the thong underwear of a woman, running away from him. And I took a picture. That's all I could do. That was my reaction. I was like, no way. Because now that I was sober, I've been really immersing myself in this culture that exists, and it's rolling over from the military community into the veteran community. So, like, for example, if a woman MST survivor has some sort of a feminine issue and needs to see a doctor, we're sitting in a waiting room full of men who got away with something. And there's a difference between a war crime and a domestic terrorist crime. And in my opinion, a man who's given the responsibility to care for, make sure a teenager is fed, clothed, has a safe place to live, and they have a key to your barracks, but they can also come and rape you, I sort of have a problem with that. And it's still happening today. And I know this because I am a volunteer victim advocate for Military Rape Crisis Center, which was founded by another survivor who now lives in Arizona. What we do at Military Rape Crisis Center is we take calls from active duty service members who are trapped in a unit, and their only option is an expedited transfer for the victim, which means he or she loses their entire support network on that base. So I am very concerned because in the last several years that I spoke up in the movie The Invisible War, and I was in that movie, and then I went to their trauma recovery program. It was fully paid for by the filmmakers, and they've been fundraising and fundraising. It's called the Artemis Invisible War Trauma Recovery Program. It's a 14-day inpatient program. They just finished the men. They graduated yesterday. We've done 2 groups of women, 6 at a time, so it's very intimate and very healing. The group of men that were just done, there were 5 graduates, 6 attended, 1, didn't. That happens. We get there and it's like, oh my gosh, just so overwhelming. It was a beautiful program written specifically for rape survivors. And they did things with me therapeutically, like somatic therapy and things that I had never heard of before, EMDR, where they have you move in your eyes, all this weird stuff. But how am I going to get the trauma out of me if I don't try these things? Because I was silenced and kicked out like garbage at 20 months after serving in the military. And the thing that really stunk about that whole thing is I paid into my GI Bill and I lost it because you have to be in for 24 months to get your GI Bill. So I came home basically feeling like a fat loser, reject, and very tainted because now I had been raped. And I will be honest with you that I was not a promiscuous or wild woman, or as I've heard, an Air Force general say, a hookup culture. That we've talked about there being a hookup culture. There might be. There might be one in high school. There might be one in the Army. I wasn't hooking up. I wasn't even drunk. I was in my uniform hours before then when I met this man. I was wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 6 months. I was 18 years old. So I spent a lot of years as a California veteran being on VA medication. And it's painful to talk about this because it's embarrassing, but I'm so grateful that you're all willing to listen because I have found out in the last 3 years of this active advocacy, my phone rings off the hook, with people that need help. And I don't necessarily feel like I'm fully empowered to be able to help them the way I'd like to, but I have made many commander phone calls, and I've had something to do with exposing a sexual assault response coordinator at Beale Air Force Base who was behaving inappropriately in an invisible war screening in front of enough people that we reported it back to the chain of command the next morning. We were brave enough as survivors to go back into a military office and say, something's not right with this guy. And we were right. And he's gone. He had been there for 10 years. How many victims at Beale Air Force Base were silenced? I don't know. Yeah. But we know now that there were some, and that's why he's gone. And if I could, I've gone to Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State, and I've spoken there to the active duty, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I do all this stuff, my own free time, my own goodwill, because I think when I can tell them I'm a real person, this is what really happened to me, this is what I was like before, and this is what I was like during, and then here I am now, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, I've been through hell, and I was suicidal for a really long time, and the VA kept me alive with drugs. That's the bottom line. So I really just, wanted to make sure that I was able to share with you guys just a couple of the things that you may be able to help us women veterans with in our own communities. So the Veteran Service Office is one thing. I think we need some cultural training. And I did let the female Veteran Service Officer know that that was in her boss's office. And she did speak to him, and he was embarrassed, and he took it down right away. But since then, I found out there are several other women in my county who also saw that in there and didn't file claims. And some of them are here today. I also want to share that federally, if a person is disabled, which in my case, I had to prove that I was raped to the VA, and I was given 100%. So it was that clear that what had happened happened. It was sort of a validation after spending a good 8 or 9 years devastated to just get some validation. But at that time, I remember feeling so stymied by my county's process of counting my VA benefits as income. So the deal is that the federal government does not require a disabled veteran to include their disability benefits as income. And there's a reason for that. Huge sacrifices were made, whatever they were. And if the VA's giving you 100%, we all know that's very hard to get. Okay, so when I got that, I kind of almost had a little breakdown, But then I realized that it was important for me to keep taking notes about how else I was affected by some strange laws in my community. So I was married to an active duty soldier. We got a divorce. And there are 2 issues that I'd really like to bring up that we really should address. One is military service members showing up to court in their uniforms. My husband showed up to court in his uniform every time. He also called me crazy on paper, so of course I just provided my VA paperwork to prove that actually I'm not crazy. I'm having a normal reaction to an abnormal violation of my body. And I still lost for 5 years, and he was allowed to expose my son to very inappropriate things, and I finally did get full custody by calling Child Protective Services on my own self, basically, and asking them to come interview my child because he just told me something. That man, my ex-husband, was a National Guard recruiter here in California. When I went to OTAG, to his chain of command, to say he's rerouted his paychecks, I'm breastfeeding a newborn baby, I'm trying to balance this all and trying to figure out why did he leave me here in the hospital, the OTAG people were horrible to me, and it shut me down more. And I ended up getting addicted to VA pain medication, like I said, and it was horrible. And I have children, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I have an 8-year-old son, and I have a 16-year-old stepdaughter, and a 21-year-old stepson. And these kids think I'm awesome now, but 3 years ago I was not awesome. I was in my robe, showering every 4 days, barely functioning, and weighing like 300 pounds, hiding because I didn't want to get raped. And now I realize that was in my head, and I've processed a lot of that stuff out thanks to that Invisible War Trauma program. and they're raising money for people all the time. But what I wonder is, why aren't we just doing that? Victoria lives kind of in the same area as I do. We've both had experiences with Marin Services for Women, which it doesn't exist anymore, but it used to be a trauma recovery rehab for women. And it wasn't all veterans. It was women from all different places. I would have preferred it was all veterans because we come from a different place. But that's missing in our community. We have a lot of veterans who have now seen you can do this without drugs, and they want to get on board, but they want to get sober, and they need the coping skills and the tools. And the VA right now isn't really offering that except for a 1-hour outpatient basis. And we all know that when you have trauma this deep, it has to come out somewhere. So this is the time. And I would like very much to ask the state to not include veterans' benefits for disability as income when a single parent is applying at Department of Child Support Services and they're doing an income and expense declaration. My VA benefits are considered income, and therefore I get like $17 a month. So I could really use some more support as a mom. And I'm just available to answer any questions you all might have. I mean, I have so many more experiences, but I don't want to take up all your time. I'm just grateful to be here, and I'm glad to be alive. But I see so many women suffering. I know some that live in cars right now in Napa. I know some that have serious addiction, substance abuse issues, and I'm really feeling like we need to do something to wrap around some services and support these folks that didn't have that so that they can find some healing. And if we can do that, it might not be too late. But right now I can state to you that I have a private Facebook page with survivors on it. And in the last 6 months, we've had 2 survivors of military sexual trauma who have tried to advocate, and they're both under the age of 30, and they both committed suicide. So this is a serious issue. We have a lot of family members who are asking me and other survivors, why did my daughter commit suicide? And I know why, and I'm able to tell them. And so hopefully that's helping their healing. But in the meantime, I'm not sure if it's still helping my healing, because I keep watching the numbers go up. And I keep attending hearings in Washington, and nothing's happening. And my heart's breaking, and it's re-injuring me. And I would really love to be able to have some intimacy and joy in my life again. And once I can stop worrying about the young people serving our country, I feel like I'm going to have some peace, and I might even take a vacation. So, again, I really appreciate you all for hearing us today, and thank you. I'd come back anytime in a heartbeat to share anything else with you guys. Thank you.
Kate, I don't know what to say. You've shared so much, and it's been very, very powerful. You've come through the worst of times and given strength to a lot of other people. So we have much to thank you for, and this is just a beginning here, as you know. This hearing is a beginning, it's not the end. So your recommendations, your experiences will help us as we fashion policy. Your ability to stick with it for all these years. I do have one quick question before we turn to Victoria. First of all, I want to say that Senator Norma Torres has joined us also this morning. During the trauma group that you're a part of, is part of that facing the person who violated you, the person who raped you? Are you able to do that?
Kind of.
Were you able to do that?
No, not at all, actually. So many stories are similar that I didn't even really bother to explain mine to you because it's not different than anybody else's. It's the same thing. He outranked me. I was a brand new private. He had been there for 3 years. He had a pregnant wife inside of this club when I saw him, and he asked me to go outside to talk to me about my paycheck. So seeing a pregnant wife at a club at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, right next to a military base, this is what I thought. I thought, what a cool guy to bring his pregnant wife to the club. That's what I thought. So when he took me outside, if anything, that pregnant wife made me think I could trust him more. And as I progressed through my chain of command, I reported first to a female who I actually fell out of a run, and I was having cervical bleeding, and I was in pain, and I was on the ground. And she said, I told her what happened. I told her the name and everything, and she said, I know him. He has a pregnant wife. He would never do that. And she went to his office and in front of all of his coworkers told him, you better go shut up that redhead over there because she's telling people you raped her. I went to the hospital. I waited for a grown-up to care enough to call the MPs. Didn't happen. A lieutenant colonel, MD, wrote in my chart but didn't examine me. Patient states she was sexually assaulted last PM. And then when I got home from sick call, I was given Vicodin, a profile to rest for a couple of days. And when I got into my barracks room, guess who was in my room? My rapist. He was in my bedroom, in my barracks. I lived in the Nuremberg barracks where they held the trials. This is a spooky old building to begin with. No chow hall, no kitchen. I had to fend for myself. I was 18, so I had to get pots and pans and a hot plate and all that new stuff, you know. I literally had just done that the day he raped me. So I get into my barracks for the first time, really, after just seeing the doctor, reporting it to like 6 people in my chain of command who blew me off. And he's in my room. And then he came back 2 weeks later. And what he wanted me to give him written proof from the medical center that I didn't have AIDS because I'm from San Francisco. And so that was kind of a cool thing in a way, and I'll explain to you why. As horrible as that was, I had just deployed to Germany. When you deploy, you are tested for everything. Pregnancy, HIV, you know, you're given all these inoculations. And I was able to show the VA that I had just had an HIV test, but my paperwork hadn't arrived in Germany yet. So I went back to the same doctor and I said, my rapist was in my room. He wants proof that I don't have AIDS. And the doctor gave me another HIV test and a pregnancy test, and he got me the results within a couple of days. And 2 weeks after that, my rapist was in my room. I gave him the paper. He left. And I saw him on post for the next 9 months, and I gained weight, and I wanted to die. And yeah, it sucked. And I've Googled him, and I've tried to find him, and I know he's a repeat offender. There's no way he had not done that before. Mm-hmm. And so we know that, you know, offenders violate like 300 times in their lifetime. Mm-hmm. And this guy was a pro, so nothing ever happened to him.
Thank you, Ms. Weber, for speaking out on behalf of all survivors and for all that you do. I should have done this at the beginning of the committee, but I wanted to invite any of the other committee members if you wanted to say anything or have any questions. Ms.
If I may, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair, I just wanted to certainly thank you for putting this hearing on, but I have, I guess, the distinct privilege of representing a portion of Sonoma and all of Napa in the Assembly, and I am the senior member on Veterans Affairs right now. So it's very heartening to know that you are out there advocating, but very disheartening to know that those two counties, you have some very direct involvement and experience in the lack of services. So I hope that both of my staff who are here, that are going to be here throughout the hearing, that we can have a conversation and see what we can do in the next year.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not at this time. Okay. Our next speaker is Victoria Sanders, who's also going to share her experience. Thank you very much for coming.
Mr. Chairman and representatives and senators, I'm not quite sure who everyone is here. I want to thank you for this chance to speak, and I want to thank you for listening today. We know sometimes just by listening, it gives people a chance to say there is a problem, and many problems are hidden, and the people who are in pain are never heard. About 5 or 6 years ago, I had the privilege to attend an event at Palo Alto where about 25 people from the Veterans Administration in Washington, D.C. came. The women, it was for women veterans, and the women spoke about everything from MST, things like breast prosthetics that were not given out but every 2 years, but if a woman loses or gains weight, she can't get a new one. And when a woman said, "I hate it when they call me Mr.," the entire room groaned. So having a group together gives you sometimes more feedback than you would get from just one or two people. And that listening could, in my opinion, be used in the context of military mental health days. I think that the military spends some time on recreational days, but the idea that I would like to see happen is for all of the military, but specifically what you could do is the Guard units start having mental health days where you could either have them be evaluated by a test, a person, they could have group time where you just check your rank and your ego at the door and you sit down like adults and you discuss what could be a problem. And sometimes just having that discussion will bring that person out of the dark and will make them go up and say, "Hey, this happened to me." But you have to have the conversation. In sexual assault training, I like that Kate with The Invisible War, and there's another movie, Service When Women Come Marching Home, and there's an older movie than that called Lioness, which is very powerful. And when you have an MST survivor like Kate, or I gave you some papers about a woman named Corey, and I'm going to mess up her name. Choka. She gave a talk at a Guard unit in Ohio, and the commander wrote her a letter, and I included that in the packet that I gave you. It talks about how much having her there humanized this stereotype of the rape victim. They found a young, vibrant, smart, strong woman. The human factor was all too clear at that point. And I know this can't replace the idea of military sexual assault training, but I think it could be a very powerful tool. And Kate has done this in Washington, and I think there's been some other cases around, but I know specifically of those two places. It's a big risk to do something like this, but the path we're on is a big risk. There are survivors and advocacy groups like myself and Kate who would be willing to do this. Once you hear the story of how a military sexual assault victim transfers from that victim role into the PTSD and goes through the VA and all of that, once you hear the whole process, you begin to understand that each step along the way can be a little bit daunting. Now, local services, like Kate said, the Marin Services for Women, I was enrolled there, and the second day I went, they closed. I have looked for places, anyone, to serve me in Marin County. That program served women who were just getting out of jail, had drug problems, and veterans with PTSD. I have tried to find a person in my community to treat me, but as soon as I say MST, PTSD, and veteran, they want me to go to the VA. I have had them say, and this was very insulting, I've had them say, "Well, I'll give you a sliding scale basis." And I've said, "Well, I pay for health insurance, I'm insured through the VA, and I have a Medicare supplement plan. Why should I have to pay more? Why should I have to pay more out of my pocket to fix this problem? Why is the state not helping us to find these people, which I know are there, but there is no way for me as a patient to call every single one of these people and ask that question." Mental health is hard enough, but having to deal with trying to vet someone on that kind of a level of calling every name, and I've called every name I've been given so far that's in my county. There are people in San Francisco, but they all want a sliding scale. None of them want to take what the VA will pay. If the state could help by paying some of that cost, that could be helpful to us. Our counties are where we live and where we should be treated, and especially in terms of the Guard and reserves, because sometimes they're stuck there with their predators and they can't get out. it's not just emotional problems that keep you from going to the VA. There are physical limits too. I have spoke to women who sometimes ride a bus 2 and 3 hours one way just to go to an hour of therapy. Riding in a bus full of men is one reason that women do not continue therapy. For me personally, Kate had to drive me over here. I can't drive more than 30 minutes, and literally 30 minutes is the maximum I can do. I live near San Francisco VA, but that's 45 minutes on a good day. I could go to Roanoke Park, again, 45 minutes on a good day. They have a robust program at the Roanoke Park VA. That's, in fact, where I started my journey through the Veterans Administration, was in Roanoke Park. When I spoke to Sean at the Marin in April, they're booked. They need more funds, more staff, and I would guess more space, and an MST specialist. I know of at least, and this is only by cursory looking, 5 people in my community who go to other places, who leave their county to go and seek care, either in San Francisco, Roanoke Park, Santa Rosa. The other problem is we have a lot of missed population, and I think this leads to a lot of the homelessness, especially among the MST survivors. I know of a woman who went to the VA for 10 years with mental health, drug abuse problems. No one ever told her she could be eligible for more. That's not what happened to me. The first appointment I had with a VA person, they made sure I had an appointment for a follow-up with the Veterans Service Officer who could help me figure out whether or not I wanted to make a claim. It's not just a woman's problem. I know that this is a woman's caucus, but I can't forget, I testified in July, before Congress, and it was the first time a male MST survivor had ever testified before a Veteran Affairs Committee, and he was dynamic, and it chokes me up when I think about him, because out of the 26,000 people that we talk about that the DOD gives us, 53% of them are men. And if I had to serve in a guard unit in those boots, I would find it daunting, even if it was only 2 or 3 times a year. There is a movie called Justice Denied that is all about male survivors. If that movie could be shown and male survivors taken to these units like Kate did and Corey did, that might make those men able to say, I was attacked. They might not have been attacked yet, but once they are attacked, they can say, hey, I saw that movie. The PTSD symptoms can be completely debilitating, and that's what happened to me. I had flashbacks, nightmares, I have emotional numbing, I was detached, I had no interest in normal activities, I had no feeling like there was a future, I was always looking for danger, I was irritable, I had outbursts of anger, and sometimes still do. I have trouble sleeping, I have guilt. A lot of the guilt's been worked through. I had some very good therapy at the Palo Alto VA. But even physical symptoms like anxiety, dizziness, fainting, feeling like your heart is just going to beat out of your chest, headaches, and even fibromyalgia, I found, was a symptom of PTSD. Briefly, my story: when a woman was raped very close to my front door, it caused my trauma to become full-blown PTSD. That was in 2004. I was suddenly transported back to 1975 at Fort Carson, feeling like I was back in the room where I was raped, unable to verbalize my feelings of shock, fear, isolation, and wanting to die. I was stuck there in my home for I don't know how many months, locking and unlocking my 3 doors. It's now 38 years later, and when I think back on that day, I was working in a barracks. It was around noon on a sunny August day. A sergeant from the supply room next door said, "Come here." And I stepped into a busy hall and found myself surrounded by 3 men. I was then backed into a room. A metal door slid shut, and I could hear padlocks being put on the outside of the door. I tried to get away. The sergeant grabbed me. He said, "You're not leaving here until I get what I came for." He pushed me down on a pile of tents and raped me. And when he raped me, he warned me not to tell anyone because no one will believe a private over a sergeant. When he finally let me go, I ran to the door. He told his friend to open it. My boss found me in a state of shock at my desk crying and called the MPs. Before I ever got to the CID, the Criminal Investigation Division, to make a statement, the rapist and his buddies had a story and word got around fast. In the end, my rapist was given an Article 15. He was reduced in rank, lost pay, and was confined to barracks. This is where what we call chain of command harassment started, because the barracks he was confined to was where I worked, and he still worked in the office next to mine. When you report a rape, you become public enemy number one. You are treated like a criminal by everyone, and no one will talk to you. If they do, it's only to tell you you got what you deserved and ask how you could turn on your buddies. You are called names, and you internalize these things, and you feel like it was your fault. The daily sexual harassment ranged from a "hey baby" to a man hanging his penis out of the window yelling what he would like for me to do. That harassment followed me through 3 transfers. Fortunately, I had an out because at the time I became a single parent, and single parents could be discharged quickly. They let me go, but that day I began the battle of fighting the fight known as post-traumatic stress disorder. When you are raped, it takes a piece of your soul. Being raped by a fellow service member is a double betrayal, but not being backed up by your commanders is the hardest betrayal of all. When you are in the military, you are in a very well-defined power system. You have a boss, that person has a boss, and up the chain. If you have a problem, there is nowhere to turn. The chain of command is all you have. Your command has the power to take away your paycheck or the roof over your head, and by association, your family. Statewide, if we could use the theories of the Military Justice Improvement Act, take the reporting out of the chain of command, make county and city rape crisis centers the point of contact for those units, work with local resources, like I said before, to find people who can support these members who cannot be transferred away from their predators. Giving the victims counsel and support teams to help them with any upcoming legal actions. In general, having state oversight over this problem. We don't have to wait for Washington, D.C. to act in order to fix this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
I can pass the patch around if you guys want to see it.
Ms. Eggman?
I just want to say, as a fellow military veteran, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And on the behalf of this body, we apologize for what happened to you, and we'll do our best to continue to try to make it right for you and for others. Thank you for your work and your service.
Thank you.
I want to make sure
Seeing no other questions. Thank you again.
No, thank you again. Really appreciate it very much.
All right, our next panel to speak on response strategies and services provided to MST survivors. We did invite the United States Department of Defense or any representatives. I believe we do not have a representative at this time. Okay. So we would like to ask, representing the state of California, Ms. Lindsay Sin, Deputy Secretary, California Department of Veterans Affairs, Women Veteran Affairs, and Brigadier General Sylvia Crockett, Director of Strategic Communications for the California National Guard, and Jennifer Lucero, Sexual Assault Response Coordinator for the California National Guard.
It was because of the budget shutdown. The Department of Defense didn't come.
And I'll give a periodic reminder, but at the end we'll be taking public comments, but we are asking for the sake of time management, if you can please sign in with the sergeant, at the sergeant's desk if you would like to speak the public comment period. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. We would like to start with Deputy Secretary Sin.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Chair Merit-Suchi, Assemblymember Lowenthal, Senator Torres, and all the committee members, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about where the California Department of Veterans Affairs can affect real change for survivors in the state. So I'd like to begin by laying out what I will discuss in my testimony. I'm going to talk a little bit about the scope of the military problem, which also includes the infographic that you've received on the dais. And then I'm also going to discuss the impact that this has on California as survivors actually transfer back into our state, and then go into the CalVet initiative to address sexual assault and rape in the military. And finally, some of our potential findings that would be good for further inquiry and potential areas where we can make a difference. So to begin, just some clarifications about sexual assault and rape in the military, which I'm sure Ms. Lucero will also talk about in her testimony as well as the SAPRO advocate. Basically, in these statistics, sexual assault is those things actually indicated in the pie chart, which include aggravated sexual assault, inappropriate sexual contact, abusive and wrongful sexual contact, and non-consensual sodomy and rape. So these are not statistics that encompass sexual harassment. They don't encompass unwanted sexual attention. So when you look at what's provided, it's clear in that 2012 DoD report that we're not talking about instances of harassment that some naysayers will kind of discuss as part of this bigger issue. These are real statistics that are not in any way inflated. And so that's the very scary and real thing that we deal with here. I'd also like to talk about the term military sexual trauma. The Department of Veterans Affairs categorizes military sexual trauma as the trauma experienced when an individual is either harassed or assaulted or raped in the military. I do not find that this is an appropriate terminology to use, and survivors will tell you rape is rape, and we prefer to talk about it as such. Mainly because MST tends to pathologize a set of circumstances and normal reactions to, I think as Kate mentioned, an abnormal situation. Additionally, it diminishes the fact that this is a crime that's happening against a personhood and should be treated as such. So regarding the 2012 Department of Defense report that came out earlier this year, it indicated a 37% increase in reported rapes in the military. And the disparaging and very alarming part of this is that this is not meaning that more people are simply reporting these incidences. Actually, the reporting or the number of incidences that were reported went down this year. So this means that the incidences are happening more regularly or they're occurring more, and that's an issue. So the Department of Veterans Affairs, as you have in your packets that was handed out by the committee secretary, show that 1 in 5 women report trauma related to sexual assault, rape, and harassment, and 1 in 100 men report that. And as Victoria mentioned in her testimony, this is definitely an issue that affects men, and we haven't even begun to scratch the surface about how we deal with male survivors, and that's terribly unfortunate. In regards to military culture, this is definitely something that needs to be addressed within the ranks of the military, in that we tend to perpetuate within the military a culture that is focused on warfighting, that is focused on the dehumanization of an enemy, and often that turns into the dehumanization of individuals within those ranks. Additionally, there is an anti-feminine tinge to some of the military communities or companies or kind of thoughts that happen. It's very easy to equate femininity with incompetence and with weakness, and that's a common thing to do in warfighting. And that, I think, directly contributes to the issue of the gender inequality that happens with the treatment of women in the military and perpetuates this issue of rape in the military. And additionally, there is a very low rate of prosecution, a very low rate of conviction in the military, as there is in the civilian side when it comes to rape, which directly plays into the fact that perpetrators are able to get away with this and they're not being adequately prosecuted or convicted, and that's a real issue. Okay, so moving on to how this affects veterans in our community. Well, the trauma that a victim of military rape or sexual assault experiences certainly doesn't end with their military service, as you heard from the testimony from Kate and Victoria. And in fact, this often leads to much greater issues that those individuals experience in the civilian world. So they may have escaped their assailant when they've left the military, but researchers have found that women that experience military sexual trauma are at a higher risk for a variety of psychological and physical and social problems. MST is more likely to lead to post-traumatic stress than any other military or civilian traumatic event. And that can include combat exposure, and unfortunately that's because of the way that the chain of command and the depth of betrayal that one experiences when they're actually raped in the military by another service member. Women are also 9 times as likely to exhibit symptoms of post-traumatic stress than those who have not been sexually assaulted. And military rape survivors often have difficulties after they leave military service, to include difficulties with access to employment, to health care, to housing, to education, and those become insurmountable obstacles because of the post-traumatic stress, anxiety, depression, and physical illnesses that they're dealing with. So this has a direct economic impact to the state of California. For instance, in the 2012-2013 County Veteran Service Officer report, it showed that only 5% of the clients that walked into those offices were women, or actually female veterans. And that can be probably directly related to the fact that women who are experiencing trauma are not going to go seek and access the services that are provided directly for them. So although the counties may be working very hard to get women into their offices and to serve them properly, if the woman experiences that type of trauma, they're not necessarily going to seek out those services directly. And so we need to possibly find other ways to make sure we reach them and educate all of our service providers to ensure that they're getting the services they need. So in that report, of those 4.68% percent of women that were actually awarded benefits, that equated to about $12 million in federal benefits. So if we were to increase the percentage of women that walked into those offices and were awarded those benefits, we'd be talking millions of dollars. So this is clearly something that we can help to improve, but also has a direct economic impact in California, not to include the other services that individuals need for county mental health services, for social services, for housing services, that are all being part of the kind of the drain on the system and going directly to state dollars that could be used, or they could be treated elsewhere. But they need these services, so we are obviously not serving them in the way that we need to. Additionally, if a veteran does file a claim for sexual assault, meaning that they're filing for post-traumatic stress related to what the VA calls military sexual trauma, they're less likely to receive a fully developed, or they're less likely to receive an award for disability than if they were to file for post-traumatic stress related to combat. So the Service Women's Action Network, which is a nonprofit based out of DC, found that from 2008 to 2010, the Department of Veterans Affairs rejected 2 out of 3 MST claims that were filed. They also found that 32% of claims that were filed for MST were awarded versus 56% for PTSD related to combat. So there's clearly a disparity in the awards that these claims are given. Trauma from sexual assault also becomes a major contributing factor for increased risk of homelessness. With the California Research Bureau survey that was conducted in 2011, researchers were able to directly correlate the issue of homelessness and military sexual trauma. So according to the survey of women veterans in California, 1 in 3 reported being sexually assaulted while in the military, and 1 in 7 reported experiencing homelessness at some point in their lives. And the VA reports that Although 23% of women veterans have screened positive for MST, over 39% of those that are homeless have screened positive for MST. Service providers will tell you anecdotally that the numbers are much higher, that they're seeing anywhere from 70 to 90% of the homeless women that they serve have actually suffered from MST. So as far as and of course, that becomes a generational issue as well, because women veterans are more likely to be single parents. So when they're homeless and when they're experiencing these issues, that is going to significantly impact their children. So that's also a serious issue in the state. So as far as what California or the California Department of Veterans Affairs is doing regarding sexual assault and rape in the military, we have in recent months begun an initiative to mainly conduct research about how we can directly impact this issue and provide some findings and where our kind of purview lies. This is really focused on educating California communities about rape in the military. We did a July 2nd event in the county of Alameda, which hosted women to speak about current federal legislation, to have survivors speak about what they went through, and then to talk about how we can make a difference in the state and how to educate California communities further. We've developed a PowerPoint as well. And that PowerPoint is providing more information about current federal legislation and some of the current military policies that could potentially be up for change in future years. This initiative also works to mainly identify potential areas for improvement, where it is that we can make a difference in supporting survivors and really in victim care when individuals come back to California. And then we're also looking at how and ensuring how the state can address these needs to the best of our ability. So with this, we've had some interesting findings that I'd like to talk about before I wrap up my testimony. For one, the department is right now in the process of looking at how it can assist the Department of Veterans Affairs with MST claims specifically. Perhaps we can look at redirection of resources to create MST coordinator positions where we can actually look at the claims for MST that we have direct power of attorney over. How can we make a difference with those? Is that through an auditing process? Is that through employees or individuals that we can work with to make sure that we are looking at helping increase that rate of approval and claims award? We're also looking at how we can develop cultural competency training to the county veteran service offices. As Kate's testimony mentioned, and as the statistics mentioned in the report of 5% of women going into those offices, certainly that's a barrier, and we'd like to know how we can develop better training, working with nonprofits, working with staff in our offices to make sure that the county veteran service offices, that other veteran service offices are getting the cultural competency training to understand not only the kind of status and attitude a victim may have when they come into those offices, but also how complicated the claims development process is. And that actually, for that reason, I'd like to also mention that many Department of Veterans Affairs officials that I've spoken with who are extremely committed to working with improving the system for developing and awarding these claims do find their own barriers within those systems. Individuals are not trained properly. The MST coordinators within the VAROs are not full-time, and they find a real struggle to make sure that these are claims that are actually fully awarded and developed. So if we can influence that on the front end, we hope to see an improvement in those numbers at the back end. The other thing we'd like to look at doing or that we would possibly, something that we found really, is that rape crisis centers and county agencies that assist sexual assault victims really are the key resources for active duty for National Guard and Reserve. We've had many conversations with the National Guard as well as with Cal CASA, who represents some of the rape crisis centers in the state. And they don't always have the capacity or the resources to meet these demands. And so the military, active duty military bases may use them as referrals, or those individuals may actually go and seek those services at those rape crisis centers, but they're inundated because only $1.42 is spent per victim in the state, which I'm sure our later individuals will testify to that. Also, civilian staffs in hospitals have mandatory reporting requirements, so that if an individual goes to a civilian hospital to get a rape kit processed, that those individuals actually have to, per California law, mandatorily report that a rape had happened. And that presents real barriers to an individual who does not want to report unrestricted. If they want to report a restricted incident, meaning they only want access to VA care, but they don't want to notify their chain of command and they don't want to notify law enforcement, they're not able to do that. And that presents a real barrier. Also, in speaking with the National Guard, we found that individuals under Title 32 status may not be required to register within the sex offender database. And the sex offender database in California could be a very useful tool in tracking sex offenders from the military who, per DoD directive, are now currently required to register in the nationwide database and then hopefully the state database. But that may not be true for Title 32 since they're under state jurisdiction. Additionally, within the Veterans Administration, there's a great lack of evidence that often accompanies a person's claim, and a rater then goes out and actually requests the medical record and requests the personal records of the individuals so that they can try and identify markers, which could be anything from going to sick call, from getting a letter of instruction from their chain of command, even to extremely improved performance because they're trying to make up for this trauma that had occurred to them. But it turns out that without filing the actual restricted or unrestricted report, it is extremely difficult for VA raters to actually identify that information within a person's service record. And so really what needs to happen is better training for victims advocates who would then be able to ensure that that person at least files some sort of paperwork, even if it's restricted, so that they can guarantee a better result on the back end when that person goes to file a claim for disability. And finally, statewide, I think the biggest takeaway that we found from this is that agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, state and federal, are not communicating enough on this issue. We have a lot of work to do together. And so CalVet is looking at how we can possibly improve that communication level. If that means that we need to potentially form a working group or a task force or something, we're exploring how that would possibly be done. So that's all I have to report. So I'll take questions now and clarify anything if I need to.
Thank you, Secretary Sin. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Brown.
I'd like to know, do we have within the budget of the Mental Health Act a provision to help California veterans?
I'm aware that we do have funding within Prop 1C, which does allot some mental health money to the county veteran service offices. But other than that, I would have to look into that and get back to you. But that's a great question.
This is through Prop 63.
Prop 63, okay. So I'd have to get back to you.
Ms. Giammatta?
If I may, just to follow on that question, Proposition 63 monies are based on county plans, and there was initially no requirement for specific veteran services. I think it's being done on a county-by-county basis, but that is a good question.
To clarify, it is Prop 63 funding that goes to the county offices, and we are responsible for a small portion. We do have some small funding for that. But that goes directly to our county offices, and we've been working with them to figure out how we can increase funding for that and what to use it for.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of very quick questions. First, on the 2 out of 3 claims that are rejected, do you feel that that is kind of then a chilling effect for anyone to actually file for? I mean, that is
Most
exactly
definitely.
the point, right?
Definitely.
That it becomes chicken and egg, and like, why would I file under that if I'm going to be denied and go through everything anyway?
Yeah, most definitely. The most unfortunate part in all of this is how this affects a survivor.
Right.
Certainly they feel re-victimized, not only when they go to a chain of command and they reject their claim of rape, but then when they go to the Department of Veterans Affairs and they're not able to get the claim awarded to them. And I am always amazed at the number of survivors that continue to persevere through this process, which they should not have to do. Mm-hmm. They go back in on an appeal for another medical examination. Mm-hmm. They continuously talk to Department of Veterans Affairs officials about trying to get this appeal reapproved. It's very unfortunate, and that's definitely a deterrent.
And one final question, Lindsay, you mentioned that there is a barrier that's created by other state reporting requirements, sort of mandated reporting, appearing in an emergency room or to a doctor. Mm-hmm. Isn't it something that we should be advocating for, however? I mean, how are we going to resolve or address this problem unless we make sure that all our systems are there to not only require mandated reporting, but to support the victim in that process? And, I'm reminded that, I also have a state developmental center in my district, and we just did 2-hour mandated reporting to outside law enforcement. We've had sexual assaults in the developmental system as well that were not reported, only reported internally, and rape kits that had never been examined. So, should we not be taking the position that we want these reports to be made? That's the only way we're going to hold people accountable.
Right. I would say that although mandatory reporting is very important, the issue is specifically related to the military and the structure of how a rape is dealt with and how the judicial system of the military or that system would handle this. So it would be something we would need to look at very closely, because until the Department of Defense changes their reporting structure, it still remains a barrier.
Ms. Atkins, then Chairwoman Lowenthal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Clearly we're going to get some great information as well when we get to the Brigadier General and we talk about the National Guard. But to back up, Lindsay, I know how much you care about this work, and I know it's going to take time to continue to kind of push into this. And following up on my colleague's comments, I immediately got the difficulty when one of the speakers talked about the chain of command. That's how you live. You live by the chain of command, and it's very important to the work that you do as a military member. So what would be helpful, given that I know how much you're going to continue to work and drill down on how we can be helpful at the state when so much is, we need the Department of Defense, is to give us some kind of analysis of where the rules bump up against each other. Because if you've talked about having a working group, I don't know how that works. I can only imagine. We try to have state departments work together on issues. So I can only imagine how we find from the state to the federal government the ability to do this. But I do think that if we can kind of see a matrix or a chart that shows where we're in conflict, because I agree, I don't think we want to put these individuals in further harm's way by requiring reporting when it could start a domino effect that causes problems while they're still there. But I do think if we had a matrix to see where there are issues, to start that discussion, because we can have discussions with our congressional members on where they need to be pushing to help us work state to federal. And those are conversations we can have, however long they take. And then, being able to see that would be very helpful. And then aside from that, I think this is a resources issue, because what the state can do, you talk about the sensitivity training, having these services, real services, with a direct help to get the person to the services at the county level. And then again, you get into how much it's going to cost and who provides the services. And sometimes there are nonprofits that will, if we're talking about the dilemma that these individuals, mostly women, some men, but mostly face, there are nonprofits within our communities that can fill the gap so that there is no cost, your sliding scale. But we're clearly going to have to keep this on the forefront in terms of the resources available to provide that kind of help at the county level, because I know how hard it is to provide a range of services in those county service offices. And so this is something we should keep hold of as we talk about budgetary issues. The impact to our state, the women who end up homeless with mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues related to that. We have 135,000 homeless individuals in the state of California, of which between 20 and 25% are veterans. So, I think there is a discussion to be had for trying to provide additional services in those service centers for this type of connection. So we're going to continue to have these hearings, I know. So if you can start on some type of matrix of where our policies bump up against each other and we can really start to work on that, we'd like to, I think.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Want to introduce another member of the Women's Caucus who has joined us, Assemblymember Melissa Melendez. Thank you for being here. And my question to you is, so far we've been talking about accountability. We're talking about chain of command, and all of these issues are so important, and so often nothing has happened. And so, the trauma has been compounded. What about prevention? How do you see the role of prevention when people enter the military? And of course, Brigadier General, I would ask you the same question when you testify.
I don't know that I'm qualified to comment too much on prevention other than speaking directly with victims advocates in the military. Certainly education needs to be increased, education for all service members. The Department of Defense has developed this year alone a significant increase in their training, which I know that our members of the National Guard are going to be able to discuss much better than I can. And it has emphasized a lot of education for all service members, bystander intervention, for instance. That's a big part of it. But also, in my personal opinion, prosecution is also a big issue. We have to find a better way to prosecute criminals to represent a direct deterrent and to also get them out of the military. And then we need to make sure that there's a way that these individuals don't come back to our communities and commit the same crimes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to also welcome Ms. Melendez. I'd like to add that she is not only a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, but also a veteran herself. So thank you for your service. All right. If there are no further questions, General Crockett, welcome.
Good morning. And, sir, madam, before I give my testimony, I'd like to ask that we have Ms. Lucero here give her testimony. She's our subject matter expert and is a trained professional and will be able to provide all the specifics. And then I will wrap it up with closing comments. And at that time, we'll take any questions that anyone may have. That's okay.
Ms. Lucero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share with you how...
Can you pull the mic closer, please?
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Thank you for this opportunity to share with you how the California Military Department is supporting survivors of sexual assault and the steps we are taking to try to change the culture and improve our processes. So first I want to talk about how our survivors are supported, and it really is dependent on the type of report that they file. So as you probably already know, we have the restricted and unrestricted reporting, which was kind of talked about a little bit earlier. The restricted report allows the survivor to confidentially disclose a sexual assault to the sexual assault response coordinator, to victim advocates, to a chaplain, or medical providers. And with this option, there is no investigation and command is not notified. And the idea behind it is that so that the survivor can get counseling. That's the whole idea behind this. So in response to this, the survivor is assigned a victim advocate to provide crisis intervention, non-clinical support, and care until the case is closed or until that victim no longer wants these types of services. So the California National Guard has close to 100 credentialed victim advocates who are proportionally distributed throughout the state to provide these services for our Guard members. If the survivor desires counseling or medical attention, then we assist them with getting those services as well. And most of the time, we rely on our civilian agencies to provide these services. We go through local rape crisis centers, the Veterans Administration, and we also have military behavioral health providers. In fact, the National Guard has several behavioral health providers who offer outstanding support for our victims of sexual assault. Weave has also told us recently that they have received a grant where military survivors of sexual assault can get free counseling services as well, so we'll be definitely using those services. A survivor can later convert a restricted report to an unrestricted report at any time. There is no time limit on that. So an unrestricted report is usually made through normal reporting channels such as the police or through the chain of command. And this type of report does initiate an investigation, and the chain of command is notified. With the response, we contact law enforcement officials to initiate the investigation. Most of the time we go through civilian law enforcement to do this. There is no longer any in-house type investigations that used to take place in the past. It is mandatory that it is reported to civilian law or to law enforcement agencies. If civilian law enforcement will not investigate, or if prosecutors won't prosecute the case, it comes back to the military to do that. If for some reason we do not have jurisdiction over the case, then what we can do, if it involves a military offender, we contact the National Guard Bureau, and the Adjutant General can request that they send out a team of trained sexual assault investigators to investigate this crime. And we've already done this on a couple of different occasions. In fact, we have somebody coming out the first week of next month to investigate one of our cases. As with the restricted process, a victim advocate is assigned to provide crisis intervention and support and care. Again, we assist with obtaining the medical treatment and counseling if the victim desires that. We will accompany the survivor to a forensics exam. As Lindsay talked about earlier, many times we cannot do the forensics exam for a restricted case just because law enforcement does have to be called, so that is a barrier to some of our victims. The thing that kind of differentiates the unrestricted from the restricted is now that the chain of command has been notified, then they can initiate a military protective order to ensure that the survivor does not come into contact with the alleged offender. We encourage things like the separate work schedules, separate work centers, drill locations, separate weekends, that sort of thing, to make sure that they don't come into contact. I believe this was brought up earlier as well. The expedited transfer is an option to the survivor if they desire it. Sometimes survivors do want that fresh start. Especially on active duty, it's good because they could go to a completely different military location. It's a little bit more of a challenge, I think, for military guard members who they have their family, as was brought up earlier, they got their whole support system here. However, with the expedited transfer, we have used this several times as well, where the individual can drill at a different location if they want to do that, or get assigned to a separate unit if they desire that as well. And the command has 72 hours to approve that. In all of our cases with our victims who have requested that, it's been approved. No problem. As far as the way forward, we know that sexual assault is a severely underreported crime in our society. And in the military, there are additional barriers that prevent victims or survivors of sexual assault from reporting. Frequently, the offender is another service member. It could be a coworker, a friend, a supervisor, or an acquaintance. And in the Guard specifically, service members may work together for their whole career. And everyone knows everybody's business, it seems, in the Guard. So as a result, victims may feel more comfortable going to outside the military channels, to seek assistance at a local rape crisis center. So how can we encourage more survivors to report within military channels? Well, we know that the way that our commanders deal with the crime and address the victim after the crime is reported results in the climate of trust that is established within the unit. Victims are deterred from coming forward after witnessing the poor treatment of other victims, either by command or by members of the organization who report the sexual assaults. So commanders can establish the climate of trust by believing the victim. Straight off. They need to believe the victim and immediately take care of that individual. Ensure that there is a timely investigation by law enforcement authorities, and by keeping the survivor informed throughout the process. In fact, commanders are required by regulation to talk to the victim at least monthly to give them an update on the status of the case. My goal is to improve command response. A couple months ago, I gave a 90-minute briefing to our brigade and battalion command teams on how to respond to incidents, how to avoid re-victimization or even the perception of re-victimization, and creating a climate where victims are willing to report. Commanders have also been provided with a response checklist. And I created a commander's toolbox on the CalGuard website that gives them all the resources that they need. After each incident is reported, I'm contacting the commander to discuss the responsibilities, to remind them of the responsibilities. And this will be a continuous education process, though, because as you know, there's always new commanders who come in. So we still have a lot of work to do in this area to ensure that our commanders do appropriately respond. I also want to try to improve the support for our survivors, of course. I recently sent out confidential client evaluations to our survivors to get some feedback, and this was actually something that was recommended at a previous hearing, so that has taken place. I've heard back from a few of them. I'm hoping to hear back from more. I want to ensure that our victim advocates are provided with the appropriate training and the appropriate resources that they need to assist our victims. I also developed a brochure for the local rape crisis centers. I'll be going through CalCASA to get all of the rape crisis centers a copy of this brochure so that if a military victim comes into those places, it kind of answers all the questions on why they should try to file through military channels. And as Lindsay talked about, if they do file the report, I have a form that they need to take to the VA to get the resources that they need or to file the future disability claims. So that's why we really want, and it's even if they file the restricted case, then we could handle it that way as well. We've hired a new state victim advocate coordinator, and we're in the process of hiring an additional coordinator who will assist victims with this. And one thing that's really good is that we've established a full-time sexual assault investigator position within the Provost Marshal's office. So that's really going to help us tremendously. We need to take a proactive approach. We need to change the culture and put a stop to the behaviors that lead to sexual assault by establishing a more professional work environment and encouraging the bystander intervention that was mentioned earlier. Guard members have received a lot of training on sexual assault prevention this year, including the annual training, the stand-down training that was conducted in July and August. In fact, there were several units that watched the Invisible War. We hosted sex signals training team that was here in Sacramento, and they gave a 90-minute presentation. And lastly, I just want to say that we really do want to increase reporting, and Lindsay kind of talked about this as well. If we can increase reporting, we can potentially hold offenders accountable, demonstrating that there are consequences for this crime and perhaps, hopefully, prevent some future occurrences. Thank you.
General, would you like to follow up with that?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, ma'am.
Sure.
In regards to the restricted and unrestricted reports,
yes,
is there some type of database that could be kept to tag certain behaviors, assault behaviors, so that when you do have a victim that is willing to come forward, you're able to attach other types of, whether they were anonymous reports, to that one abuser or to that one attacker?
That's a good question. We do have a database that it's called DSED, and I can't remember exactly what that stands for, but it is a database for the Department of Defense that we enter all of the information on that has the victim's information as well as the offender's information. And it has in there specifically what the charges were. But as far as like for restricted reporting, if there was an offender, since it's restricted, we can't tell anybody that the incident occurred. Okay,
I understand that.
Yeah.
But can you share through a database how a victim was raped, the pattern, handcuffed, locked in a room, 3 other people assisted? These are patterns that criminals take with them, and they typically stick to their to that pattern that could be tied back to a suspect. So if there's 100 victims and only one of them comes forward, maybe through outreach you can request others to come forward.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that one. I know that it might be a law enforcement type thing, but yes, we can definitely consider something like that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for Ms. Lucero before we turn to General Crockett? General.
Well, good morning, sir, ma'am, members. Thank you very much for holding this hearing today. It represents the conviction that the California Military Department has with regard to handling any issues of sexual abuse and, more importantly, in some cases, ensuring that we do convict the perpetrators. Our priority is first and foremost to provide all of the resources that Ms. Lucero just talked about to the victims, and then it's absolutely important that we ensure that every incident is investigated. The investigatory phase is critically important because it will determine if we have sufficient evidence to go forward and actually prosecute someone. All investigations of sexual assault are conducted by external law enforcement, something that Ms. Lucero just talked about. And again, that's critically important to note because oftentimes we do question the issues of the chain of command. So by having external law enforcement, either civilian or those that come from National Guard Bureau, does set a standard stage so that if there is any attempt to hide any issue, the external law enforcement agencies will definitely be able to depict that. Our preference is to refer the cases to the civilian law enforcement because the penalties for sexual assault in civilian courts are much more stringent than the ones that we have in the military. When civilian prosecution is not an option and there is sufficient evidence of wrongdoing, we do prosecute. We absolutely go forward with the prosecution. Our absolute goal in the California National Guard is to work and train in a professional environment that is free of any abuse that renders our soldiers or airmen victims. We embrace the tenet of personal responsibility, and we have every conviction with respect to holding those who break the law accountable. Extensive training, as she mentioned, has been conducted to better educate our soldiers and airmen on how to prevent and ultimately protect themselves from becoming victims. And further, we continue to stress to everyone that regardless of rank or position, anyone who's accused of sexual assault will be prosecuted and held accountable. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them.
Thank you, General. I think that's very powerful coming from the top, from the California Military Department, that you would make a strong statement of a zero tolerance. I think that is much appreciated. I have a question. So I just want to clarify the difference between the United States Armed Forces and how it treats, how these type of serious crimes are reported. As we know, there is the Military Justice Improvement Act being debated in Congress, and where at the United States Armed Services levels, the decision to prosecute serious crimes need to go through the chain of command rather than in the hands of military prosecutors. So you're saying that with the California Military Department, they can go directly to civilian law enforcement, civilian prosecuting agencies, and bypassing any requirement to go through the chain of command?
Absolutely.
Okay. Does that affect the operational readiness or effectiveness of the California Military Department in any way?
Does the fact that they use civilian law enforcement affect that? Absolutely not. In fact, if an individual does go to a civilian law enforcement and the DA does pick up the case, then in fact we hope for conviction, obviously through the civilian law enforcement. When the department or the DA decides not to prosecute because of insufficient evidence, then it is given back to the California National Guard, and at that time we look at it and determine how we can use the evidence that has been presented to prosecute. And we may not be able to prosecute to the degree that the individual has provided simply because of the lack of evidence, but we will absolutely pursue any wrongdoing and do everything we can to get a conviction.
So the question that I have in my mind is, if it works in California, then why isn't it good for the nation?
I'm not sure what you said. If what works in California?
If the military readiness of the California Military Department is not affected by the ability of soldiers, of service members to go directly to civilian law enforcement and prosecutors, then, perhaps that appears to be an argument in support of the Military Justice Improvement Act to give the decision to whether or not prosecute certain serious crimes should be in the hands of military prosecutors rather than a decision made by the chain of command.
Well, actually, sir, I think that there are lots of options when you discuss something like that. And the issue is that the chain of command has responsibility. And those of us in the chain of command like to believe that all of us, all the time, make the right decisions with respect to ensuring that everybody is protected and everybody that comes forward with an issue will be helped through the chain of command. When you take that responsibility out of the hands of the chain of command, then in many ways it does water down the responsibilities that we've been vested with. There have been those individuals, I'm sure, that have not made the best decisions or the right decisions, and I suppose in any system that you will have those circumstances. But the military chain of command is very, very important to the sanctity of what we do for the in the armed forces with respect to having total purview over those soldiers that are working for us, and then again those that we report to.
I can appreciate that, but at least it sounds to me like with the California Military Department, you are trying to strike that balance between ensuring and enforcing the chain of command for optimum military effectiveness and readiness, but at the same time, the Guards members have the option of going directly to prosecutors and to civilian law enforcement.
The one issue that I would point out in the California National Guard that is very different from Title 10, given that we're Title 32. In the Title 32 arena, if an individual is convicted of sexual assault, the maximum penalty, through a courts-martial, the maximum penalty that we can impose is 1 year in jail. If an individual is convicted of sexual assault and it's defined the same, sexual assault or rape in the civilian courts, then the penalties are much more stringent. And therefore, we prefer that an individual who has done something that heinous go through the California state system, therefore offering an opportunity to severely punish the individual versus coming back to us through a system that can only offer 1 year in jail. The federal system can offer more time imprisonment than what the Title 32 can.
Ms. Melendez.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to interject, and I know your question revolved around why wouldn't this work at a nationwide level, but you have to remember that we have many service members who are serving overseas. So if we have members deployed to, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, I don't want to be tried by their civilian police force.
Of course.
And I don't think you would either.
Yeah.
So that's part of the problem, is it's just not feasible.
Yes, I thank you for reminding me, but I just wanted to clarify that at least with the Senate bill that's under discussion, Senate Bill 967, the United States Senate, it's whether to turn it over to the military, the United States military prosecutors, rather than the local law enforcement. But I appreciate that clarification. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Eggman, then Ms. Atkins.
Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for it sounds like real work that you're doing. So it sounds like ideally, I mean, we would make the penalties consistent across, no matter what system you're tried in, the penalties should be consistent. So it sounds to me like that's a real area that we need to work on, because a year for a rape just is unfathomable and not what anybody would term justice, I don't think. So I think that's something that we really need to focus on. And when we talk about prevention, I guess my question is around, if people are tried in the civilian system, does that information get back to the Guard so that people begin to see, if somebody does something, they're tried, they're held accountable, something that they go away, like, maybe they just got out of the Guard, or maybe they went somewhere else. Do other members know that they have been tried, convicted, and punished? And how is that, communicated throughout the rest of the force?
Yes, the chain of command does get the results, if that's what you're saying, from the civilian courts, and we are aware of the conviction, and depending upon the conviction determines what we do with respect to a separation board. Because when someone is convicted in the civilian courts, it does not automatically mean that we have the authority to separate them from the military. But again, given the issue and the significance of a crime, we do pursue whatever UCMJ actions that we have once we receive the results.
Okay, thank you.
Ms.
that
Atkin.
we have authority for. I'm sorry, excuse me. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the statistics for MST in the National Guard, I got the statistics from the Department of Defense survey. What are the statistics for the National Guard? Do you keep that information in terms of percentages of incidents, that sort of thing?
We do keep that. I don't have it with me, but I'll be happy to get the information in and provide it to you and to all the members here.
Thank you, General. I'm just thinking in terms of, if we want to promote what we do here in California with the National Guard and best practices, it might not be a bad idea to compare, and just see how we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Lowenthal.
Yeah, I'd like to know if arrests for sexual assault are available to civilian law enforcement. So if someone is arrested within the military, is that information ever transferred to civilian law enforcement
Arrested by...
for sexual assault?
Yes. If the way that it works is kind of through the restricted and unrestricted process, and I will tell you about a case that I'm familiar with. We were at training, and 2 soldiers were involved, and the next morning, one soldier alleged that the other had assaulted her. And as a result, she came forward, and it was a unrestricted report. And so we immediately had to provide that information to the local law enforcement around the training site that we were training at. And subsequently, they looked into the information, and the law enforcement did come back and eventually arrest the soldier, the alleged soldier. So yes, the information is provided. If the soldier is, if the report, like she said, is unrestricted and there are no reports made with respect to any arrest, et cetera, then no, that information obviously is not provided to anyone.
I'd like to provide a point
And
of
the
clarification as well.
unrestricted or restricted decision is made by
The individual.
the victim.
Can I provide a point of clarification to that as well?
Please.
Ma'am? Okay. I believe the latest DOD directive, and perhaps you'll know more about this, Ms. Lucero, is that when an individual is convicted, depending on the type of conviction, the DOD individuals responsible for handling that conviction are required to ensure that that individual registers on the National Sex Offender Database, and then they also contact local authorities so that that individual is supposedly tracked. I'm sure there's issues with that, as there is in the civilian world. If an individual moves from state to state, how do you track that person? And how do you ensure that they actually do register on the sex offender database for the state? But that's very recent, so that has certainly not been the case in past years.
Just a quick clarification: is Title 10 more consistent with civilian law than Title 32 for punishment? Do you know?
I don't know that it's more consistent. I would just say that the latitude with respect to the punishments imposed are more stringent than what you can in Title 32.
You can get more than a year.
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the panel and apologize in advance to everyone and to the counties and the nonprofits. I have to excuse myself actually to get to Napa, but I know we're grappling with very, very serious issues here. But I did want to just, if I may, just thank and commend the California Military Department for doing a Women's Equality Day event out at your headquarters that, as we are wrestling with some of these very, very, traumatic issues, that we also look at the positive things that are occurring within all of our systems. That we got to give them hope, as they say, as a good another activist once said. So I want to just thank you, and I do have a couple of staff here that are monitoring the rest of the proceedings, and we'll look forward to supporting the good work of this joint committee effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yamada. Any other questions? Thank you very much. We are running a little behind schedule, but this obviously is an important subject that deserves the time it gets. And so I'd like to call up next the county as well as the nonprofit representatives. Sean Stevens, the County Veteran Service Officer for Marin County. Ellen Yin Wyckoff, Associate Director for the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Ann McCarty, Associate Director, North County Rape Crisis and Child Protection Center from Lompoc. I appreciate it if you can come forward. Also, we want to remind folks that we are running a public comment sign-in list for time management purposes. I believe we have a good number of folks that have signed up already, but if you would like to engage in the public comment session, please sign up at the list at the sergeant's desk. Mr. Stevens, welcome.
Mr.
Yes,
Masucci,
yes.
I just wanted to say that at 12 I have to leave, and I'm sorry because I really want to stay for this, but I have something else that I must attend. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you for having me. My name is Sean Stevens. I'm the Veteran Service Officer for the County of Marin. I'm also an executive committee member for the state CVSOs, which is the County Veteran Service Officers Association. First of all, I'd like to openly apologize as a military service member and veteran. I would like to openly apologize to Victoria and Katie for not only the situation that they had to testify about today, but about how the services that they received were not adequate. And based on their testimony, I promise I will make this a priority in my county to make sure that this type of stuff doesn't continue to happen. With your help, your support of the continuation of the funding that we just got a one-time funding which increases the budget. With your help in continuing to get that budget, that money, we will be able to set up situations so that their situation doesn't happen again, so that it doesn't have to be that way. And it really is it's a funding issue. My county has 17,000 veterans, a little under 18,000 actually. I'm the only member of I'm the Veteran Service Officer for the county. There is no vet rep. We are working on it. We do have, because of this recent funding that we just received, we have been able to allocate space to the VA, who now comes to Marin and sees veterans who are suffering from PTSD and sexual trauma, who sees them twice a week. And we're working on getting that bumped up to 3 and 4 times a week. That she's seeing approximately 30 to 40 veterans within our county. And that allows them to not have to travel to the city, not have to travel across the bridge, not have to search for parking, not have to deal with the memories that go with that drive to the VA. And I find it important to help veterans, not only female veterans, but all veterans in these issues, because they are a member, they're a voting member, they are a member of our society, and they are a member that seems to find themselves in trouble more often than not as a result of something that's happened to them while in the service. At the last conference, just to touch on a couple issues that I heard mentioned up here, I do want to say that at the last conference that was held in Marin County for the Veteran Service Officers, we did have training by the VA regarding sexual trauma within the ranks of our returning veterans, as well as veterans that have been home for a while. Getting them to open up and to talk about their experience, it's not an easy deal. It's not at all. And to look at me, I am not the most approachable person, and I realize that. I realize that I sometimes, look, trust me, I promise, I look tougher than I am. But I would like to say that in the last 4 weeks, let me start out with this. In the last 30 days, I have had 4 people come through my office suffering from a sexual trauma. One of them was a male, 3 females. One was incarcerated in the county jail. So I had to go to her. This is not a new problem. This is just a problem that's coming to light. It's very unfortunate that it's not been addressed sooner, but it is something we need to address, and we need to address aggressively. So with that, I'll thank you.
Thank you. Any questions at this time?
I just, you said something that piqued my interest. I just want to be clear that when we're talking about this type of assault, it is not always something that was perpetrated by another military member, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Because you just mentioned that you had a member who was in county jail, and is that where this took place?
No, ma'am. This particular service member, actually, she was on active duty with the Coast Guard, and she was raped by a civilian, and then facing charges unrelated to that. But as we know, something like that, something so traumatizing like that, creates nothing but a downfall from that point on.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I
so,
agree. I just wanted to point out that
Yes,
I just
ma'am.
want everybody to remember that we are not here to demonize our
No, ma'am.
military members.
Absolutely.
We are here to discuss how we can be supportive of them, but it is not always military members
That's
who are
right.
perpetrating these types of crimes. So I just want to be
Yes,
clear that that's not
I appreciate
the tenor and tone of this committee
Se-
meeting.
If I could just go a little further, sexual trauma to an active duty service member happens while on active duty or in the Guard, okay? Like you said, ma'am, it doesn't have to be by another active duty member or another member of the military. So with that being said, we need to have better counseling for these people in our counties. We need to have access to help with the issue. Because as a service member, you when you put the uniform on, you tend to put on a red cape, if you will. And something like this can be seen as a weak moment in your life, and you find it very difficult to go forward with it. One of the most difficult parts about doing a claim for sexual trauma happens to be the unrestricted and the restricted reporting. That is one of the most difficult parts about doing any sexual trauma claim, because the majority of the people are doing unrestricted. And so you're lucky to find that small piece. It's a very small piece of paper that goes into the file that said there was a restricted report done. And if you are able to get that file, if that piece of paper made it to the National Archives, then you've got a good claim. But the fact of the matter is, if they do restricted, which most, I believe, I don't have the exact figures, but I believe they do, just because of the fact a lot of times it's somebody within the chain of command who's done the bad situation, who's created the area of problem, then it's difficult to prove. And what we do look at is we look at their career. The person, however long or short it might be, we look at where their career was. We try to, and this is what I do in my office, I try to then break it down to where the event, the time and date of the event, and then I try to show how this career went after that. And a lot of times, the VA wants stressors. They want to know, they want the person to put their life on this piece of paper, this traumatizing, they want to relive it, and we don't do that in my office. We don't do that in my office, and I say we. Like I said, it's just me. But I stand here before you for the County of Marin, and we don't want to put any veteran through the emotional issue that, again, we don't want to have to create the trauma again. So, like I said, we brought in somebody from the VA. They meet with our veterans, and they help put the stressors together for them.
Thank you. I think we need to move on with our next speaker, Ellen Yin Wyckoff. And I understand you are also going to be deferring some of your time to Verna Griffin Tabor, yes. Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Community Solutions. Yes. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Chairwoman Lowenthal, and members of the committee. My name is Ellen Yin Wyckoff, and I'm the Associate Director of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Many of the other speakers have referred to us as CalCASA, which we also go by. We serve as the statewide professional association for the 84 Rape Crisis Center programs here in California, and we're very honored to be here today to provide testimony at today's hearing on this very important issue of military sexual trauma's impact on survivors in California. Currently, California's rape crisis centers play a critical role in the civilian community as they provide confidential advocacy and support services for survivors of military sexual assault. As Sean has mentioned, and as Assemblymember Melendez has mentioned, many of the survivors are not only just dealing with sexual violence that has occurred while they've been serving in the military, but many of these survivors also bring prior victimization experiences or incidents from in their lives. So confidential services that are essential for every sexual assault survivor, but for military survivors, most are concerned about this information being shared within the military, even with restricted and unrestricted reporting. Even when a survivor of military sexual assault makes an unrestricted or restricted report, having an advocate present during this process and any legal proceedings is very helpful in terms of for the healing for the survivor and to ensure his or her rights and support needs are met. So that is why rape crisis centers serve as a key resource for military survivors and their loved ones. There are rape crisis centers in every county of California that are available on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week, where rape crisis center advocates are available to provide free, confidential support, advocacy, and accompaniment services to all sexual assault survivors. Last year, California Rape Crisis Centers served over 31 sexual assault survivors, including those from military sexual assault. And the 2010 CDC, U.S. Centers for Disease Control's National Intimate Sexual Violence Victimization Survey indicates that there are over 2 million rape survivors in California alone, and 8.5 million survivors of all forms of sexual assault, such as sexual battery, oral copulation, and sodomy. So clearly our current programs or rape crisis centers can only serve less than 1% of sexual assault victims in California. However, these centers still serve as a key resource for sexual assault survivors who are actively serving in the military and those on veteran status due to the confidential and free services that these centers provide. And as some of the speakers have mentioned before, many of these centers are inundated with these requests to provide services. According to the most recent Department of Defense statistics, 67% females and 80% of males do not report their sexual assault while serving in the military. So most survivors need and require services, even on veteran status, which California Rape Crisis Centers are helping to address this need. California Rape Crisis Centers are willing and have been available to meet the needs of all sexual assault survivors. However, funding for these centers have been declining over the years as these centers rely very heavily on federal funding for these services, specifically as we've dealt with the recent federal budget crisis. Currently, the State General's Fund only contributes a total of $45,000 for the entire state's services to sexual assault victims, which amounts to $1.42 per victim served last year. On behalf of CalCASA, I'd like to offer the following 3 recommendations for the committee's consideration. 1, funding to the California Rape Crisis Centers additional funding to California Rape Crisis Centers to specifically address the needs of survivors and their families of military sexual assault and trauma. Additional funding can help reduce the waiting list for survivors to obtain individual and group counseling, safety planning services, legal and advocacy services, and prevention and education outreach programs for military and veterans groups. California's rape crisis centers are leading the way in providing prevention programs on addressing sexual violence within their communities. Number 2, regular and ongoing training for staff at veteran centers and veteran centers on assessment for military sexual trauma and cross-referrals to California Rape Crisis Centers, since it's unlikely that a survivor would disclose their sexual assault and would not know what benefits they could access. 3, amend the regulations of the California Victims' Compensation Program to include addressing the needs of military sexual assault survivors, especially as no reports may have been made. Similar guidelines exist for sexual assault and domestic violence survivors who may not have filed a police report, or if the report does not contain enough details to prove a crime has happened. In these instances, current code allows for survivors to provide a letter from a therapist or rape crisis or domestic violence counselors as evidence that the crime has occurred. Moreover, these benefits, if provided by the Victims' Compensation Board, are usually also eligible for federal reimbursement at 40% of those costs. To gain a better understanding of how our centers address advocacy and counseling needs of military survivors and more information about these recommendations, I'd like to go ahead and defer it to our 2 local experts from our local programs, Verna Griffin-Tabor from San Diego.
Good morning, Chairman, Chairwoman, and members of this committee. I also want to thank Chairwoman Lowenthal for starting this meeting off by acknowledging that this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, because domestic violence and sexual assault often don't occur in isolation. Again, I'm Verna Griffin-Tabor, and I'm the CEO for Center for Community Solutions. We're a nonprofit that's 45 years old in San Diego County. We work for the prevention and healing of sexual assault, domestic violence, and elder abuse. And each year we serve 11,000 San Diegans. We are the only rape crisis center for the city of San Diego and 75% of our county. As you probably know, San Diego County has the highest concentration of military personnel in the state of California. As of January 2013, we had 110,000 active duty military as well as 118,000 family members. And this represents about 8% of San Diego's population. Our organization, Center for Community Solutions, responds to sexual assault 24 hours a day. That means when somebody is sexually assaulted, we join that survivor at the hospital for the duration of that exam. We take calls 24 hours a day on our hotline. We provide legal services, counseling, outreach, prevention, and advocacy that Ellen referenced. And what that means is sit in the interviews when law enforcement is questioning or prosecutors are questioning so that somebody is not re-victimized by the very system that's meant to protect them. We support victims in regaining their dignity. Our center serves both civilian and military survivors and their families. So approximately 10 to 15% of the clients that we serve are currently coming from the military and their families. Some military personnel that we happen to serve do not want to seek services or report the crimes to the military in fear of not being believed, or they're concerned that it will negatively impact their career, or the lack of confidentiality that currently exists in the military for sexual assault cases. For civilians that we serve who've been raped by military personnel, reporting the crime to the military can be daunting and the military system confusing and overwhelming. In San Diego, our organization is actively advocating to develop a military-civilian partnership. Over the past year, the Navy began hiring staff to assist with sexual assault. They hired our entire Rape Crisis Center team, making it really difficult for us to serve sexual assault survivors. They were able to pay 50% more than what we were able to pay and provide full health care benefits for the entire families, something we cannot afford to do. And still, we continue to serve and receive military personnel requests for services. We are very grateful for the service of our military. Currently, we're trying to do our part to serve military and civilian trauma survivors and their families, but we're doing so with limited resources. Our caseloads are huge, and we are stretched. We try very hard to avoid a wait list. When you've been assaulted and you have the courage to reach out for help and to be told you need to wait is really unconscionable. We're asking for your help to serve both military and sexual assault survivors and their families. People can heal and move forward with effective trauma-informed supports. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Ann McCarty, welcome.
They always end the show with a, comedy routine, so here we go. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Chairwoman Lowenthal, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. My name is Ann McCarty, and I am the Associate Director for the North County Rape Crisis and Child Protection Center, located in and providing services in northern Santa Barbara County. I've had the honor of working at the center since 1974. While over 19 years at one agency with a military installation in its backyard might make me knowledgeable in working with military survivors, my in-depth knowledge and understanding of the military culture goes a little bit deeper because I am married to a military veteran. He served proudly for 24 years, and that gives me a bit more insight into the culture of the military and the men and women that serve our country proudly. We also have a son who is an active duty airman. He is in a deployable career field, so now I have the added benefit of knowing a little bit more about what goes on overseas in a war zone. I've witnessed a great deal of change over the years, some good, some bad, but while the landscape of our military is forever changing, one thing stays constant: The services that nonprofits provide to survivors of sexual violence remains the same. I remember clearly one day in the late 90s as I provided support for a young female airman, a security forces troop, during the court-martial of a fellow airman who had sexually assaulted her. She was dressed in her blues. She sat motionless in the courtroom as the panel of members delivered the not guilty verdict. As the courtroom emptied, she stood up, looked at me, ripped off her security forces badge, and threw it on the floor, saying, "Ma'am, this is not my Air Force." That young woman's words have reverberated in my head many times over the years. With the institution of the Department of Defense SAPROS program, which includes more options for those who want to report sexual violence that has been perpetrated against them, the increased education and outreach done on installations, the bystander intervention training, yes, progress has been made. But unfortunately, some programs have been rolled out way too fast, meaning the systems and the staff weren't completely prepared to deal with the increased reports. Military response has continued to grow since the standing up of SAPRO, but there's still a long way to go. I applaud the military for the work that they are doing, but warn them that not engaging with sexual assault crisis agencies in their area or near their installations that do the work day in and day out is a recipe for failure. One area that continues to need more attention is in the training arena. We hear from military survivors that we work with in our agency that the military's law enforcement members are ill-equipped to take a report of sexual assault. Somehow the importance of specialized training for officers that will be responsible for taking a rape report needs to be emphasized. In my career, I've been astonished at the way in which agents communicate with survivors, and while we try to encourage a different tactic, unless their leadership supports it, little is done to change. Survivors also express concerns regarding the mental health system within the military. Like law enforcement, active duty personnel that work within the mental health system also move around a lot. We've had survivors seek us out because they know we're not going anywhere. This continuity of care is important on their journey of healing. Many have expressed that their providers just looked at them, bewildered, not knowing what to do. There's no specialized training in grad school for these providers. It's not uncommon to have an active duty member who has suffered an immediate assault also be a survivor of childhood molestation. Military treatment providers do not have that specialized training to deal with past molestation issues. Survivors know this, and survivors shut down. We need to wholly treat, not just the immediate trauma. When you factor in an assault that may have happened in a war zone, in a remote post guarding an aircraft, in an underground launch facility, or in someone's dorm room, the trauma becomes more complex. It cannot be treated as a standalone trauma. This is where nonprofits excel. We've heard testimony regarding training. The discussions begin in basic training. While that's all great, the bottom line is accountability. Perpetrators must be held accountable. With the recent events on our installation, Vandenberg Air Force Base, whereby a rape conviction was wiped away with the stroke of a pen, the mere fact that the panel brought back a guilty verdict was a huge win. We were very excited. We thought, after all these years, the training, the education, the outreach, it's sinking in. We felt like our work was paying off. Rape was rape, and it was not going to be tolerated in their Air Force, not by someone who wore their uniform. But with the stroke of a pen, General Helms' decision to grant clemency left us taking many, many steps back. Her decision did more than erase that conviction. It went a long way in sending a very negative message to all survivors. It saddens me greatly to know that we have experienced a decrease in reports to the local installation sexual assault response coordinator. But I get it. Why report? Why go through another traumatizing experience by reporting? Why trust a system that is broken? While I know they are trying to fix it at the top, the damage is done, and now we will have to work many years to build that confidence back up. One of the things that's being done to bring civilian providers and military providers closer together is a program developed by the Office for Victims of Crime. In November 2012, OVC held a Train the Trainer event for its Strengthening Military-Civilian Relationships to Respond to Sexual Assault curriculum. I am the consultant for California, and I believe strongly in this program and its ability to bridge the gap between civilian and military providers. By educating civilians on the military culture, advocates are better equipped to understand the culture that differs greatly from their own. Opportunities also exist for military providers to learn how to better collaborate with civilians and how beneficial that relationship can be. To date, we have conducted one two-day training in California, as well as presented at the National Sexual Assault Conference in Los Angeles, held in late August. Now it's time to address the other elephant in the room, money. Our workloads have increased. We see more military sexual assault survivors than we used to. We've had to increase our own staff and volunteer training time to make sure that we are providing the best services to military survivors. Much like understanding the Hispanic culture, the Hmong culture, advocates must understand the military culture in order to provide appropriate service and referrals. We've done this without extra funding or support. We provide training to military officials, we attend their events, we partner with them, we provide advocacy, we answer the call, but we aren't compensated for those efforts. I fully support the recommendations for funding, specifically for supporting military survivors. They have proudly answered the call for us. The least we can do is make sure that we can support them when they need us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the work that you do. You are on the front lines of providing services for the survivors. Do we have any questions from the committee? Yes, Senator.
And I sort of asked this of the previous panel in regards to database, and I know that you are not the detectives in the room, but you do have a lot of experience caring for the victims of rape. To your knowledge, as you attend trials or briefings with victims of sexual assault, I'm talking about I'm talking about soldiers in the military being sexually assaulted by another soldier. When a civilian police department is involved, to your knowledge, when they begin their investigation, do they have records about the sexual predator that they are investigating?
That's a really good question.
Do they have access to any of this information? I'm not picking on the Air Force. My son just came out of the Air Force, but I'm just saying, if there was an airman being investigated, would the Air Force be willing, or are they willing to provide that information about that suspect to a civilian police force?
Ma'am, I think that can be tied to collaboration. When you have a strong team working together, we all work on the sexual assault response team in our local communities, and when we have an immediate rape or a sexual assault that's being investigated, we come together as a team and discuss it. Members of our Office for Special Investigations, OSI detachment at Vandenberg Air Force Base, they're invited to the table as well. It also goes a long way in developing the collaboration with the local SARCs that are on the installations. I know for my SARC, I can call her up and I can ask any question I want, as she can do to me. We've got that kind of, we don't have to speak in squeaks and warbles anymore. We have an open line of communication. I can't tell you whether or not the law enforcement shares, but just knowing my law enforcement agencies within my own community, I would hedge a bet that there's a very good line of communication between civilian and active duty investigators.
But there's also a code of silence. And, those are more speed humps for the victims to have to overcome. That's why I think it's important for this committee to follow up and maybe get some feedback from the department on how they go about these investigations. Thank you.
Senator. Seeing no further questions, we do have a pretty good list of on our public comments. Thank you again very much for coming forward. We will now move to the public comment section, and we do have a fairly long list of speakers, and we also have members that have, unfortunately, time commitments in their busy schedules, and so I'm asking all of these speakers to try to keep your comments to around a minute. So please, let's see, I will call forward Karen Scott, Linda Sanders, Evelyn Thomas. If you can come to the mic at the front. Yes.
Ma'am, can you use this microphone right here?
I need a sample.
Yeah, you can bring this all the way up there.
Hi, my name is Karen R. Scott. I'm an MST survivor. I was active duty for 7 years. It's going to take longer than a minute, so I'm not going to read what I wrote. I'm just going to bring out the points that that's devastated me. By reporting, I feel very strongly by taking it out of the chain of command because of the corruption, because of the culture that's prejudiced against, and they want to cover it up because they're more concerned about their unit looking bad. They're not they're not allowing us to have options, to have safe access to report it and to get help. And then we're slandered, and then we're kicked out. And then when we get out, we try to get help with the Veterans Administration. For 23 years, I tried to get help with the Veterans Administration, and they would not. Today, I have key people there in Long Beach, California, that's helping me. But everything that these three people are doing, Gene Willis is wonderful. My mental health doctor is helping me, and my primary care doctor. Everything that they do, the veterans, there's people within the Veterans Administration that is denying, blocking, and getting in the way of everything that they're trying to do to help me. When I reported these crimes, my commander got upset. He put me on a stadium in front of the whole post, made me apologize to the whole unit. He locked me up in the room, would not allow me to eat or drink, and then he slandered me on my DD-214 of a reenlistment code that I could not reenlist. I was honorably discharged. I had a good record, and I was a good soldier. I went from private to a warrant officer. I was in communications, an aerial observer, and a pilot. I did not deserve the treatment that I received and the non-support in the attack. In Korea, I was on duty. This did not happen out on a date or outing with fellow members. This happened on duty in a locked van, the commander's communication van. I was attacked, and because I was able to defend myself, he did not succeed with the rape. I sustained injuries to the neck and to the back. I could not get help for that afterwards. My commander, when I talked to him after the incident at the evacuation hospital, I woke up, I was assaulted, there was a man on top of me, there was no sheets, it was a steel table, and I went to him, I told him, he said, do not say anything, you need to shut up or it's going to end your career. So I left Korea traumatized, went to my next duty station. I had to go get help on the outside because I was not getting help on the inside. They was targeting me that I was a troublemaker and I was ruining men's careers. So I went to go get help on the outside so I can act normal and continue with my service and with my career. I had every intention of staying in the service, the Army active duty, for 20 years plus, but it was ruined. I was sabotaged, and my career was destroyed, and my health was destroyed with irreversible conditions. And I'm suffering today, and I have to suffer for the rest of my life. And I have people at the VA not helping me. And I don't have support. I don't have money. In 2009, they took my benefits out of retaliation and left me homeless. I ended up going in emergency, had to have surgery. I had to recover from surgery on the street. There's just so much that's happened, and I can't sit here and explain it all because it would take too long. But the key points is that the chain of command has failed for decades. And I could not get support. They denied me correct and enough service-connected disability. I can use that to go get help outside of the VA's not going to help me. And they are ignoring all legal requests from my attorney.
Ms. Scott, if you leave your contact information, we can follow up with you more as to your specific cases. We have your phone number here, but I need to ask you to wrap up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much thank you for coming forward. Linda Sanders, Evelyn Thomas, Tariq Faridi.
Hello, my name is Linda Sanders. I'm from Carlsbad, California, which is in San Diego County. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, and I'm a caregiver. My son is 100% disabled from a sexual, from being raped when he was 17 years old in the Coast Guard at Camp May in New Jersey. He went homeless. No one would help him. The VA wouldn't help him. I am a wife. My wife is a survivor of rape at Camp Pendleton, California. That rape resulted in a pregnancy, of which the child died. But as you all know, abortions are not allowed on military facilities. She carried that baby. She was harassed, forced to work 10 and 12 hours a day at her job at the base. She was isolated, shipped off to another part of the base that was far away from anything. The baby died. She will never be the same as a result of this. And I am a caregiver. Because you see, my son needs me. The VA won't help him, so I'm there. I'm a wife. My wife is 70% disabled from this. I'm her caregiver. You forget about the families. The fathers, the mothers, the sisters, the wives. I'm here to represent them. Now, in San Diego County, our big VSO is a United Veterans Council. I'm sure you've all heard about it. It's huge. Says that it's very, very successful. Zero help from them. They even deny that military sexual violence, otherwise known as rape, exists. I spent 2 years trying to work with that organization in San Diego to no avail. They do not support rape victims, and they do not support women. So my other option is the CDVA, the California Department of Veterans Affairs. I receive no assistance from them. It's just recently that I understood that they are political appointees. I didn't even know that. So they have no allegiance to me as a citizen. They have no allegiance to me as a mother of a disabled, 100% disabled son. Or no allegiance to me as a wife for a 70% disabled wife. I do not know what happens here in Sacramento, but I do know I drove all the way here. I paid the high gas prices to come and say something to you. And I'm so disappointed. Both of my representatives have left. Ms. Atkins has left, and Mr. Chavez never showed up.
Ms. Sanders.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Thomas, and I'm from Carlsbad, California. I am the 76th Assembly District Representative for the San Diego County Democratic Party Central Committee. I am also the Executive Director and co-founder of the Sanctuary Project Veterans. It is an activist outreach ministry that advocates for service members, veterans, and their families that have been impacted by Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We also advocate for survivors of military sexual trauma. I am the newly appointed member for the California Democratic Party's Veteran Caucus on LGBT veterans issues, and I am an honorably combat veteran. I served in the Army National Guard and the United States Marine Corps, and more importantly and finally, I am a survivor of military sexual trauma. I want to say thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you who are still here, and thank you for taking the initiative to begin to eradicate the epidemic of rape in the military. We need to give the men and women hope and faith that we as a community will begin to take care of them. Me personally, I want to share briefly my story. I was raped by 4 Marines, which resulted in a pregnancy, which eventually led to the murder of my son. And as an open lesbian veteran going through the claims process, the VA claims process, 1, I had to provide evidence that I was a lesbian. 2, I had to provide evidence that this rape was unwanted. And 3, I had to provide evidence that this was a corrective rape, which means that I served prior to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, homosexuality or homosexuals were not allowed in the military. So I had to serve in silence. So when it was discovered that I was lesbian, they wanted to correct me, hoping if they raped me, that would turn me heterosexual. This is about saving lives. And as you lay your head down on your pillow tonight, I want you to think that there's some man or some woman in this nation or abroad who's been raped in the military that is contemplating suicide because they cannot deal with the pain. We need your help. This needs to stop. And I'm sad that we're standing here discussing this because it should be over.
Thank you for sharing. Please, if we can have all the speakers come up. I have Tariq Faridi, Stephanie Resigno, Ann Richardson, Clayton Smith, Grace Contreras. Please, you don't have to speak in that order. Whoever can come up first.
I'll
Please
be
go
very
ahead.
brief. I have had the privilege of presenting to President Obama a CARE program for mental health services, as well as Senator Bernie Sanders, of the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Unfortunately, in spite of the executive order the President has issued and the Legislative Compliance Committee, Senator Pat Murray, the VA gets in my way. I purchased the equipment, I donated it to the facility, and the commanding officer there, or the Director of Medical Affairs, rejected the use of that in spite of the President of the United States executive order. And so it's really, really difficult to work with the Veterans Affairs and the Veterans Health Committee. They do not allow anything outside of what the chief commanding officer and the vice chief does at that VA hospital, and it is very, very sad. It is happening nationally, in spite of meeting with the president and in spite of having a written letter from Senator Bernie that this should go forward. He says, Mr. Friddy, I will do everything in my power to help you. It's a non-profit venture for me. It is not a for-profit something I'm doing. I have a very amazing technology, $159 heart monitor that shows what's happening to the emotions, what chemicals are being produced, and what kind of therapy to give to heal them.
Why don't we talk about this later? Because and we can follow up on that.
I'm done. Thank you very
for
much.
sharing.
They're very politically impossible to work with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm kind of nervous. I got discombobulated. I couldn't even find my glasses. I don't want to say an MST survivor because every day I never know what's going to trigger me and how it's going to go. It's ruined my life. I'm the poster child for if you don't get treated, you don't get help. And we try and you report and you get retaliated against. You keep it inside and it ruins you. I just spent almost 2 months in the hospital, almost lost my life, lost half my blood because I can't deal with what had happened to me, even though it was initially, it was back in 1976. It's just horrible. We need to have a system. General Crockett, it's fine. Oh, it works for a certain point. If you believe for 1 minute the chain of command can actually solve this problem, then you're more deluded than I am that I am actually a survivor and I'm thriving. And secondly, I want to thank you for actually being here. It took me a long time to decide whether I could come down here and handle it or not, but I'm glad I did. I know I have a lot of friends over here who can. And I was talking to Dr. Faridi, and his technology sounds pretty good because I remember when I was raped as a civilian afterwards as a part of the punishment and retaliation, saying you women are nothing more than a bunch of chemicals. All of your emotions are chemicals. And I found out later that was probably true because electrical and chemicals. But still, I like to think I'm a human. May have failed because of what have happened to me, but I'm still a human. And please go forward and use equal rights. Just because the federal courts say rape is an occupational hazard, it's not. Why don't you tell the feds, the DOD, and everyone in the military, no, a California resident is a human. The same thing if it happens as a civilian, it's a crime, but in the military, it's an occupational hazard? I mean, come on. I can't even explain that to a 4-year-old when I say you can't have another cookie. It should be equal. We're all human. Anyway, better shut up before I say more.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
My name is Ann Richardson, and I'm here as a private citizen. My grandfather served in World War I. His 3 sons served in the Army and in the Navy, and he had 1 daughter that was a WAVE, served in the Navy. My uncle was injured twice and sent back to active duty. He became a predator. He raped his first victim in 1950 and again his 5th wife in 1975. Prevention is very important. My uncle served in the Navy. His half-brother served in the Navy in the 1950s and witnessed a male-to-male sexual assault. I just attended a national conference of caregivers, and the majority of the military treatment is going to go to TBI and to post-concussion syndrome, and there was not one single panel on military sexual assault. So it would be very helpful if you could look at the prevention and then look at also the other end of the spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having us here today. My name is Lorraine Ploss. I'm with Cal-Am Vets, a nonprofit. I'm their state legislative chairwoman, and I think what I'll do is I'll just send you my notes so that you could take a look at my ideas that I have here today. But one of the things that I did want to kind of mention is this year we had a bill go through past AB 9061, and that's where we placed a veteran, whether it's regardless of a woman or a male, on the Commission of the Status of Women and Girls. And we set a precedence that I think might help here. I'm also on the Governor's Interagency Council on Veterans, and so we have a big think tank. We have a lot of ideas. There is a need to have an enlisted or a current member from the conflict, this current conflict, Afghanistan or Iraq, available to you if not on this committee. And if not, I'll be approaching you with that bill this year. I think it's wonderful to hear what the U.S. Army National Guard was saying here today. It's just amazing, because when I was in, it just was not there. However, that is the California Army National Guard we're talking about. And we have some wonderful things for California. It is not the active duty military. So that distinction really needs to be understood and made. We have no control over the federal government or the VA, but you can affect California. And I think when you see this issue that was brought to light today by Kate, she's a member of my post, we can affect change here in California. Why is it only a year that a person is punished? Our CVSOs walking into that same office that I live in that same county, it should be a zero tolerance for anybody that represents the state and gets a county or city payroll check to be a county veteran service officer to have this transpire. So we can affect that change here and have a zero tolerance. Make it a safe environment for anyone to walk in. So back to my distinction. Deputy Secretary Sin would be a lovely ex officio or liaison to this board, and someone like Kate, with having been enlisted and suffering MST like Kate did, would be a great person that you could refer to and ask questions, and be a great and the other thing is a person representative from the state of California representing the VA in these hearings here, I think would be great. My point that I really wanted to mention is that CalAmVets is a community nonprofit, and it's one thing I'm not hearing here today, and we provide that access to get back into the community, your life, and a civilian community feeling, and we provide a lot of support out there. So if you have people, you can use my card and refer them. But our nonprofit organizations really provide assistance. We pay mortgages, we pay rent, we have guidance. We sponsor them through their whole tour of college if we can. We adopt them. And the basic camaraderie of having been there, been a service member, really helps a lot. So let's not overlook our veterans service organizations and help you with your process here today.
Of course, thank you, and thank you for sharing.
Hi, my name is Sarah George. I'm a former United States Marine and a combat veteran. I have a semester and a half before I get my master's degree in vocational rehabilitation counseling, and the biggest thing that I have yet to heard is what happens to the victim long after that they leave out of the military. That hasn't been focused. And meaning 4 things that need to be identified is most female veterans are going to be younger than their male counterparts. 2 is identify that they are a racial minority in the VA system. And 3, most of them have lower incomes than male veterans. So that, to me, is a problem. 4 is unemployment. So we talk about victimization, we talk about rape, but what about helping them long after they get out? We need to connect with, like DOD, Department of Rehabilitation, Women's Clinic, that's part of the new program for all Department of Veteran Affairs, and help these military sexual trauma veterans. And so we need to kind of figure out something and support them and to get them back in the community and make them identify what they were once before. And that's getting them into a transitional. And that's the hardest thing, is finding transitional. I know as a veteran, that's the biggest thing I had a problem with, is transitioning out of the military. And I couldn't even imagine being sexually assaulted. So those are the things. And also to look at the modulas that are practiced on PTSD. Most of them are catered to male veterans, not females. Maybe looking at a new passageway of holistic. I know as a PTSD diagnosis, I like holistic. Looking at different ways to help females, make them feel safe. That's what they need. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess it is good afternoon at this point, and I really thank you for having this time here. My name is Kate O'Hare Palmer, and I'm actually one of the women years later that this young lady was talking about. I am now the national chair for Vietnam Vets of America for the Women's Committee. I've been on the California State Council for about 5 years. I did not come out as a military sexual trauma survivor until 1994. The only reason I did that was because I went to the dedication of the Women's Memorial in Washington, D.C., and met up with many women when we were in Vietnam in a combat zone those years, many years ago. I now have my Social Security card. We all kept silent. What happened to me was there was no choice, because once you're spiraled down when you open up to military sexual trauma and finally recognize it, after being with 3 or 4 psychologists, psychiatrists over the years, never ever once being asked if I had been in the military. Never once. So never cut that part of the onion. It's really sad for me to hear what's happening as far as we still have to have these kind of meetings. It's wonderful that people are talking about it, and it's wonderful that people are listening. If you talk about prevention, I think we have to look at societal changes for the lack of understanding of what is okay and what is proper behavior, whether you're in a military uniform or out. What is society accepting as proper behavior? And I do believe in people being away from their home environment. Their familial standards leads to more problems. I see this. The comments that Victoria made, the comments that Lindsay made, the comments that Ann McCartney made about using our local environments, using the local services that are already available. Link that up with the military, because they've already got it going.
Okay. You know, I'm sorry. If you can submit your
I would like to
proposals
submit
and
mine,
read
yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Clayton Smith. Thank you for your time. I'll be a little bit blunt and honest. I'm one of 25 whistleblowers who came forward at the Adjutant General's confirmation hearing in February of 2012. Just before that, 25 whistleblowers came forward, and then 15 of us showed up at the Adjutant General's confirmation hearing. Similar to that, we kind of got cut off and silenced and left with very little time to speak. So I would like to submit my comments. I would very much appreciate it if they go on record, because I'm going to be providing them to Senator Feinstein's office and the Armed Services Committee, as well as other members of the legislature. In a nutshell, I'll go to one point in my comments, and I will highlight what happened at the federal level earlier this year when the Department of Defense had to go to Congress and testify about what was going on with the sexual assault cases. I don't have a sexual. My individual allegations have nothing to do with the topic of discussion here. I'm just a fellow whistleblower that agrees that your fundamental problem is your leadership in the military. There is no oversight. None whatsoever, and I'm furious about it. Okay. I still work in the headquarters, but I'm going to be. I'll submit these, and I'll highlight the federal case. Congress attempted to pass a law to usurp the commander's authorities in these types of cases. That's exactly where the solution is going to be: usurping a military commander's authority, because they don't get it, and they're not going to get it until somebody is standing over their shoulder and has the authority to say, "Look, you're done, buddy."
Okay, I think this. Thank you. Your comments will be incorporated into the record.
Hello, my name is Graciela Contreras. I am a former EEO specialist. I was employed at the California National Guard until they wrongfully terminated me for whistleblowing against their corruption and abuse of power and authority. How does this tie in with this subject today? One of my fellow whistleblowers attempted suicide for the 3rd time and almost succeeded. She was sexually assaulted, reported up the chain of command. Nobody did it. Nobody did anything at the California National Guard. Nobody. The guys are still there. She was forced to go back to work with them. And when she lay in the emergency room having her stomach pumped, The National Guard, the California National Guard, actually sent a person out there to serve her termination papers.
All right. I think the hearings made it clear that there needs to be protections for whistleblowers and against retaliation. And so if you can get...
And recently another person that was sexually assaulted, she just got fired by email. The same issue, but it's just an abuse of power and authority, and nothing is going to change. I agree with Clayton. It has to be taken out of the chain of command, or it's not going to change.
All right.
I don't care what they say; it's not going to change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Diana Eichler, and I just want to say that military sexual trauma is an epidemic because they know they can get away with it. And I went to the CalVet, leadership, and we had a legal seminar, and what bothers me the most is the legal seminar said that it was policy. Now you have to remember, when the women and the men are kicked out of the military, they are given like a pre-existing diagnosis, so the military isn't responsible, like schizophrenic, personality disorder, so they can wash their hands. But when you get out and you get caught up, if you get caught up in the legal system, then they use this schizophrenic or personality against you. And we were told at the seminar that it is the policy of Los Angeles court system that if a veteran comes in with these diagnoses, that their children are taken away from them. So it's not just trauma in the military. It's the trauma and the victimization that they go through after the military, too. And I think there should be an investigation of the court system if this is really going on in California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Rebecca Blanton. I'm the Executive Director of the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. I just wanted to bring to your attention that the Commission, along with the California Research Bureau and CalVet, is doing the third iteration of the Women Veterans Survey. We are 5 weeks into it. We've had almost 500 respondents, and we would ask, and we will be sending each one of your offices a link to put on your website, as well as you can email vetsurvey@library.ca.gov. We will provide postage-paid return surveys you can send to your constituents so that we can evaluate the needs, and we have a specific MST section on the questionnaire so that we can evaluate the needs of women vets in California. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, members, thank you for staying. Reed Milburn, U.S. Air Force veteran, 8 years. On behalf of the CDP Veterans Caucus and Chair Lawson Stewart, we just wanted to offer ourselves as a resource and appreciate you taking the time to have this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Williamson. I'm the CVSO for Butte County. I have approximately just 21,000 veterans in my county. It's myself and one full-time veteran service representative. So thus, we don't have personnel to get out into our 13 unincorporated areas, and we have less than 15% of my clients are female. Some of those are dependents, some of those are widows, thus less than 1% of my cases are MST trials. The majority of my clients are male, over 55 years old, mostly from the Korean, Vietnam, and World War II eras. I would like to thank you for your support with the recent funding to the CVSOs, the one-time funding, because that will bring somebody into my office to do a lot of the lengthy legwork and research so that I can get out into those unincorporated areas and we can get more women and more disabled veterans into our office and know that we are there for them. There are 55 CVSOs in the state of California. Many of us are women and we're new and we're coming in here energized and excited to use our compassion from our services to help other women. Let's see. We have a vet center in Chico as well as a VA mental health clinic. They both provide triage for veterans. When they walk in, they do not turn veterans away. We work together, but on my side, I have to say that I have to have a case. I do not provide clinical work, or I'd be a liability to my county. I build a case, a legal case based on evidence. So if I had one vote to make the situation better, it'd be education for prevention, education for young men and women just joining the service to know that they have to have evidence. Call somebody to come pick you up. Leave the base. If anything, it's the rest of your life that will be affected. So one-time little accusation of AWOL status or Article 15 really doesn't matter all that much. I think that's where the most help could be used. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes our hearing. Chairwoman Lowenthal, would you have any closing comments?
I want to thank all of you who came forward to educate us. That was the purpose of this hearing, to better understand the scope of the problem. You've presented that. I know there's much more to hear, but hopefully, as a result of your testimony and your courage, we can address the policy issues and address the problems that you shared and see if we can do a far better job for the people who've given so much to us, to our state and to our country. So I just want to thank all of you, and just know this isn't the last time that we hope to hear from you.
Senator Torres, Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Senator Lowenthal for providing, an opportunity for us to get together once again and discuss this issue that has been in the forefront of the Women's Caucus agenda for at least the last 2 years since, I have been involved with you attending hearings and that sort of thing. The women that testified here, the women veterans, their testimony was powerful, to say the least. And I appreciate your courage. I appreciate your willingness to come forward and state the facts as you saw them, as you've stated them. I think that you have made quite a difference in us moving forward and continuing this topic. For the military, there are several members that were here. I cannot stress enough that we just simply cannot say that we are appalled by what is going on in the military in regards to rape, whether it's against a woman or a male serviceman. That it is not enough to say that we will not stand for it. We must act, and we must act with a swift, zero tolerance for this behavior, and we must punish those who have the power to stop this bad behavior and continue to allow these military sexual predators to continue to prey on our innocent soldiers. So thank you for standing together, and thank you for being here. Thank you once again to the committee members that are still here. For those that left, we can't control Southwest. They only fly certain times. So it's not that they did not want to be here. The fact that they were here and that they, read the information, I think shows great leadership on their part. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was a little late getting to this meeting, but the beauty of technology is that I was able to watch the entire hearing from my phone on the plane. So I heard everything. I had to step out briefly for another meeting. I'm glad I returned, though, because I did want to make some comments relating to what I've heard so far here today. We have a lot of people here today who are upset and angry and still experience some anguish about what they've gone through. And we all understand that it's a hard thing to come forward and talk about what you've gone through. It's easier to not talk about it. So I do appreciate you having the courage to come forward and relive it again, if you will, by speaking to a crowd full of strangers. I will reiterate, though, that this committee meeting, from my understanding, was to understand how we can help improve the situation in California and not demonize our military members. I served in the military. Between my husband and I, we have 32 years of service in the Navy. I know all about what goes on. I've experienced it myself, not rape or sexual trauma, but when my first deployment to the Philippines, I was, I think, 20. I didn't look much different then than I do now, but it was only a few years ago. Kidding. But I was about 20 years old, and I was very excited. I was going on the first time to the Philippines, and I had the command senior chief say to me, we were at a command picnic, and there were, everybody was around and just having a good time. And he said, I'll sign your orders to go to the Philippines if you show me your tan lines when you get back. Now, I don't consider that trauma. Okay, it was an appropriate remark. You move on. But things like that go on, and it doesn't affect the rest of your life. And I'm concerned about some of the data that I see in here where they're suggesting that military sexual trauma also includes what we now call sexual harassment. That just concerns me that number perhaps might be a little bit bloated more than it should be, because trauma is trauma. And the stories we've heard today from some of those testifying, that's serious stuff. What I experienced was no big deal. So I want us to, as a committee, do what we can do to improve the situation, bearing in mind that we are limited. The military has their way of dealing with things, and justice, from my experience in the military, is swift. In most cases, not in all cases. Much like in our civilian sector, it's not always swift. But we are limited in what we can impose on our military. And there was a gentleman who made the comment about our military leaders, and I just had the conversation with my son about this, that this is not a policy problem in my eyes. This is a leadership problem. You have some leaders who are very good at what they do, and they lead and they take care of these situations the moment that they are advised that they are going on or that they have happened. And you have other leaders who look the other way. Those are the problems. The policies are in place. It's a matter of courage on the part of leadership, which is clearly something that we can't change as a legislature, but there are things that we can't do. So I just wanted to make that clear. I appreciate everyone coming forward. I appreciate the chairman having this hearing. I am curious as to if we are going to have a priorities list. Are we going to act on anything we've heard today? Because while it's wonderful that we are enlightened as to what's going on, it is not helpful to just have people come forward, share their story, and nothing changes. This is not supposed to be a testimonial. So I'm just curious, Mr. Chairman, do we have anything in mind for acting on anything we've heard today?
Well, I certainly intend to follow up on a lot of the ideas that were brought up today. I think each one of us as individual legislators can also pick up the ball and run with it. But I think collectively, I want to thank Chairwoman Lowenthal and the Women's Caucus for making this a priority. This is certainly a priority for us and for all veterans. This is just the beginning, and we will follow up on this. I want to thank all of the panelists for speaking. I want to thank so many of you, the woman who drove from San Diego. It sounds like folks came from throughout the state to attend this hearing. Thank you so much for being here. And most especially, I want to thank all of the survivors for having the courage to step forward to speak up for all survivors. We will follow up on this, and we thank you for your service. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.